Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly onto a gray Atlantic deck where a once mighty emperor stands at the rail, watching France disappear beyond the mist. The year is 1815. The war is over. The drums of Waterloo have stopped. You can almost hear the creak of the ship's timbers as the British vessel Bellerophon cuts through cold water toward exile. Napoleon Bonaparte, general, consul, emperor, legend, is now a passenger under guard. He squints at the horizon, half expecting to see eagles rise from the waves and carry him home. But none come. You probably won't survive this sea breeze. It smells like disappointment mixed with sea salt and old cannon smoke. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing who's staying up late with history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world around you feels eerily still, as if even the wind pities the fallen emperor. Napoleon had hoped for asylum in America, maybe to build a quiet farm somewhere beyond the reach of kings and coalitions. But Britain has other plans. Instead of the wide plains of the New World, he's bound for a speck of volcanic rock called St. Helena, lost in the South Atlantic. As the gulls vanish behind, you sense that this voyage will not end in escape, but in slow erasure. Back in France, the news spreads like a thunderclap muffled by velvet. "The usurper is gone," cry royalists, hoisting white Bourbon flags over Paris. Church bells ring again for a king not seen since the revolution first stripped crowns from heads. Yet beneath those bells, veterans in worn blue coats clench their fists. They remember the emperor not as a tyrant, but as a symbol of merit, of mobility, of France standing tall among nations. Even in defeat, he embodies something the restored monarchy cannot kill. The idea that talent might rise above birth. Louis XVIII, plump and gouty, limps back into his ancestral capital like a man returning to a haunted house. The Allies, Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, escort him politely, smiling the way one does when re-gifting an unwanted present. To Europe's monarchs, the Bourbon restoration is a moral victory. To many French citizens, it's déjà vu, with worse tailoring. You can picture Parisians peeking from shuttered windows as the white flag replaces the tricolor atop the Tuileries Palace, that banner of lilies fluttering where Napoleon's eagle once spread its wings. The streets smell of mixed emotions, perfume, gunpowder residue, and the sour yeast of unrest. Some cheer the returning king. Others mutter that they'd trade all the lilies in France for one more sight of that short man in a gray coat. Historians still argue whether the people truly wanted the monarchy back or merely craved an end to exhaustion after 25 years of revolution and war. What's certain is that peace feels awkward, like wearing someone else's shoes. At court, Louis XVIII cultivates the image of a moderate, promising stability while sitting between two ticking bombs. Royalist vengeance on one side and revolutionary memory on the other. He issues declarations dripping with paternal affection. "My people," he calls them, though many of those people once marched his relatives to the guillotine. His portraits show him benevolent, hand extended, stomach carefully concealed by brocade. The courtiers cheer the restoration of divine order. But the bureaucrats he keeps from Napoleon's regime quietly keep France running. The new king might be back, yet the empire's machine hums beneath the throne. In the taverns of Paris, whispers crawl along the counters like spilled wine. Some claim Bonaparte will escape again. He always escapes. They say his guards are secretly loyal, that American ships prowl the ocean ready to rescue him. A tailor on Rue Saint-Honoré sells jackets cut in the imperial style, calling them just good fashion. A soldier's widow places a small tricolor ribbon inside her prayer book, pretending it marks the Psalms. You sip your coffee and sense that France is living two lives at once, the public face of royal repentance and the private heartbeat of revolutionary pride. Night in Paris no longer carries the confident glow of empire. Gas lamps flicker over bullet-pocked walls, reminders of barricades past. Street sweepers clear away confetti from royal parades while avoiding eyes that remember the same stones stained with 1793 blood. The smell of coal, the rattle of carriages, the cautious laughter from cafes. They all carry undertones of memory. Everyone's pretending it's 1775 again, but even the wallpaper knows better. Far away, on St. Helena, Napoleon begins dictating his memoirs. The island is more prison than paradise. Barren ridges, wet fog, and British guards who double lock his door at night. He tends a small garden, walks the cliffs, and replays campaigns in his head like an endless game of chess. "France will remember me," he says to his companions, and you almost believe him. His words, carried later to Europe in smuggled copies, transform defeat into legend. In those sentences, half boast, half prophecy, he builds the myth of the misunderstood hero, betrayed by fortune yet eternal in spirit. One quirky tidbit from the island. He keeps a pet rabbit for company, naming it after a lost regiment. The soldiers joke that even the rabbits salute him. Sometimes he asks his valet to announce meals as if still dining at the Tuileries, just to keep ceremony alive. The British officers roll their eyes, but secretly they're impressed by the man's refusal to shrink. You can picture him raising a glass of watered-down claret and whispering "à la France" to the Atlantic wind. Back home, that wind carries rumors faster than ships. Stories of the exile's stoic dignity feed popular imagination. Painters sketch him as a Prometheus chained by jealous kings. Poets mourn the sun of Austerlitz, now setting over foreign seas. Meanwhile, Louis XVIII commissions portraits of himself surrounded by angels and constitutional documents, trying to look modern without actually being modern. The contrast only sharpens public nostalgia. In the countryside, veterans of the Grande Armée plant trees they call Napoleon oaks, swearing to drink beneath them each anniversary of Austerlitz. Children play soldier using broomsticks, shouting "Vive l'Empereur!" until their parents hush them. Police informers jot down names. The tricolor, banned by law, appears in hidden stitches on waistcoats, a secret rebellion of thread and dye. You imagine one such seamstress smiling to herself as she irons a blue-white-red lining invisible from the outside. History may belong to kings, but fabric belongs to the people. And yet, for all this quiet defiance, fatigue seeps into daily life. The war debt weighs heavy, trade sputters, and soldiers return to empty farms. Bread costs more, wages shrink. The king's ministers blame the weather, the revolution, the English, anyone but policy. Discontent whispers through markets like wind through reeds. When harvests fail, preachers claim it's divine punishment for worshiping reason instead of God. You sip thin soup in a Paris inn and think, France has survived terror, empire, and invasion, yet it still can't find comfort in its own skin. Some evenings you stroll past the Palais Royal and glimpse a new fashion. Young men wearing their hair brushed forward in imitation of the emperor's style. Calling themselves les idéologues, they discuss liberty, property, and the social contract over cheap wine. To police, they're harmless eccentrics. To historians, they'll become the seedlings of liberal opposition. It's funny how a haircut can carry more rebellion than a rifle. By 1821, word reaches Paris that Napoleon is dead, or so the British claim. The announcement draws sighs, tears, and a few ironic cheers from those who once feared him. In secret, candles flicker behind shuttered windows. Women wear black ribbons. Men toast the man who made us proud. Even some royal soldiers bow their heads. Historians still argue whether that grief was genuine mourning or a convenient gesture of nostalgia. Either way, the myth solidifies. France's fallen hero becomes immortal precisely because he's gone. You step back and realize tonight's story isn't about an emperor losing his throne. It's about a nation losing its direction. On the decks of ships and in the salons of Paris, everyone's searching for what comes next. Kings return, flags change, but identity lingers like perfume on an empty coat. As St. Helena fades into legend and the white Bourbon flag flaps above a restless capital, you feel the next act approaching. Slowly, inevitably, like the tide itself. The years slip by like fog over the Seine, and when you look up, the white flag still flies above the Tuileries. The Bourbon lilies flutter softly against a sky that has forgotten the eagles of empire. Louis XVIII sits upon the throne, not with the confidence of a conqueror, but with the cautious posture of a man who knows the chair might collapse at any moment. You picture him shifting his weight, as though the ghosts of 1789 creak beneath the cushions. You walk through Paris in 1815. The streets are patched and scarred from decades of upheaval. Soldiers in faded blue coats mingle uneasily with those in royal white. Both sides pretend to ignore one another, yet their glances could draw blood. Shopkeepers repaint their signs to include "by appointment to His Majesty," though half of them once sold imperial specialties. The city feels like a stage play where everyone forgot their lines. Louis XVIII returns to his capital, escorted by allied troops, Austrians, Prussians, Russians. Foreign bayonets gleaming under a French sun. Even the horses look confused, hooves clattering on cobbles that once rang for Napoleon's triumphal parades. The king rides in a carriage cushioned like a pastry, smiling through pain and gout. The people cheer, though not too loudly. They've learned that enthusiasm can be dangerous when regimes change as often as seasons. "Order," the king declares in his first proclamations, "shall be restored." But what kind of order? To one side stand the émigrés, the nobles who fled the revolution, their estates seized, their pride dented. They return now in powdered wigs and outdated fashions, demanding vengeance and compensation. To the other side stand the administrators, generals, and businessmen who thrived under Napoleon's meritocracy, muttering that the world has no time for lace cuffs and divine rights. And in the middle, you, an ordinary Parisian, caught between history's two tempers, nostalgia and progress. Historians still argue whether Louis XVIII truly believed in constitutional monarchy or merely found it convenient. What's clear is that his crown sits atop a bargain. To keep peace with Europe's victors, he must promise moderation. To survive among his own people, he must promise change. But promises in politics age like milk. The king's ministers draft proclamations thick with compromise. They speak of reconciliation and national unity, but the subtext reads like a truce, signed in invisible ink. In cafes, pamphlets circulate, some praising the new regime as the end of chaos, others mocking it as Bourbon version 2. Same arrogance, fewer victories. A grizzled veteran taps his pipe against a table and says, "They may bring back the king, but they can't uninvent the citizen." You can almost smell the tobacco and irony mingling in the air. Meanwhile, France herself looks exhausted. Fields once trampled by armies yield thin harvests. War widows petition for pensions, the treasury shrugs. The Allies occupy fortresses to ensure stability, which feels suspiciously like punishment. British soldiers buy wine and complain it tastes like vinegar. Locals nod politely while plotting how to overcharge them. The French army, reduced and demoralized, becomes a museum of lost grandeur. Old uniforms, new suspicions. Louis XVIII, to his credit, understands that the monarchy can't simply rewind time. He keeps many of Napoleon's administrative reforms. The centralized prefect system, the metric system, even the Napoleonic Code, though he pretends it's just a happy coincidence. The bureaucracy hums with quiet efficiency, staffed by men who once served the emperor, but now bow to the king. You might think of it as political rebranding avant la lettre. A quirky little anecdote circulates. The king once quipped, I have been a king long enough to know that you must keep good servants, even if they once served bad masters. It's unclear whether he said it with humility or mischief, but either way, the empire's clerks keep their desks. Paper triumphs where swords have failed. Still, beneath that bureaucratic calm, passions simmer. The émigrés, nicknamed les ultras for their ultra-royalist zeal, demand more than restoration. They want purification. They petition for laws to punish regicides, meaning anyone remotely linked to the revolution or the death of Louis XVI. Some even suggest exhuming Robespierre's remains to hang him posthumously, though logistics prove complicated. You can't help but grin at the absurdity. Revenge delayed by decomposition. The ultras fill salons and church pews, dreaming aloud of feudal France reborn. They speak of divine rights, of returning lands to their rightful owners, of expelling Bonapartist vermin from public service. Meanwhile, moderates and liberals, lawyers, journalists, middle-class thinkers, clink glasses to Voltaire and mutter about constitutional safeguards. It's not just politics anymore. It's two competing religions of memory. To hold the balance, Louis XVIII cultivates ambiguity like a fine wine. He hosts lavish banquets celebrating the harmony of old and new, seating generals who fought at Austerlitz next to nobles whose fathers died at the Bastille. The dinners end in awkward silence, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware. But for now, the appearance of peace will do. France, like an overworked actor, needs intermission. You stroll through the royal gardens one morning, hearing a brass band play a cautious mix of tunes, half royal anthem, half military march. Children wave tiny white flags embroidered with golden lilies. An old man selling newspapers mutters that, in his day, flags were tricolor and kings didn't need foreign guards. A British officer buys a paper and laughs. At least your monarch isn't in exile on an island. You resist the urge to answer, give it time. The king's health worsens and his walks in the Tuileries become slower. His physicians blame age. Pamphleteers blame divine irony. Even so, Louis XVIII remains surprisingly pragmatic. He legalizes the sale of nationalized church lands. Too many new owners, too much potential chaos to undo. He tolerates limited freedom of worship, careful not to ignite another wave of anti-Catholic fury. The gesture earns him cautious applause from Protestants and icy glares from bishops. The monarch may sit beneath the crucifix, but he knows economics outpaces theology. Historians still debate whether Louis XVIII was shrewd or merely lazy. One camp calls him a statesman who steered France through perilous times. Another calls him a placeholder between revolutions. You, half asleep in your bed tonight, might imagine him as both, a tired man presiding over a tired country, doing just enough to keep the pot from boiling. Outside the capital, rural France remains loyal, though not necessarily to the Bourbons. Peasants crave stability, not ideology. They pay taxes, plant wheat, and gossip about the emperor's ghost haunting the moonlit fields. "He's not dead," whispers one farmer's wife. "He's just waiting until the lilies wilt." It's superstition, perhaps, but even superstition can frighten kings. One evening, as you sip wine in a smoky cafe, a young poet recites a new verse. "We are born of storm, not prayer." Applause flickers, cautious and quick. The police officer in the corner pretends not to hear. You realize how fragile this piece truly is, how silence itself has become political. By 1818, France begins paying off its reparations. Allied troops withdraw, and for the first time in years, the French tricolor, yes, the banned one, appears again, unofficially, fluttering from a sailor's cap in Marseille. No one arrests him. Maybe the gendarmes are too tired. The city cheers, not for rebellion, but for relief. Yet relief is dangerous. It breeds memory, and memory breeds hope. A rumor spreads that an English visitor brought home a lock of Napoleon's hair and sold it for a small fortune. Another rumor claims the emperor's spirit appeared to a priest in Normandy, confessing his sins in Latin. You can laugh,
But such tales reveal a truth. France is haunted not by ghosts, but by potential. The past isn't gone. It's merely waiting for an encore.
Louis XVIII senses this unease. He tries small gestures to win affection, pardons for ex-Bonapartists, modest reforms, a public statement honoring those who fought for France, whatever the banner. But the ultras hiss betrayal, and liberals call it hypocrisy. Being king in post-Napoleonic France is like juggling torches on a powder keg. You watch him retreat further into ceremonial safety, portraits, parades, polite applause. He's not hated exactly, but rarely loved. Perhaps that's what monarchy means now, a compromise between reverence and irrelevance. The Revolution taught France how to be passionate. Louis XVIII teaches it how to be polite again, if only for a moment. As twilight falls over the Seine, you glimpse reflections of torchlight in the water, shimmering between gold and red, between monarchy and memory. France breathes softly, uncertainly. For now, it endures. But the air tastes like tension, and you can already hear, faintly, the echo of another storm assembling beyond the horizon. You find yourself in a chilly government hall, sunlight slicing through tall windows onto velvet drapes the color of old wine. Courtiers stand in tight clusters like chess pieces that forgot how to move. It is 1814, technically 1815 by the new reckoning, but Louis XVIII is determined to prove that France has entered an era of calm, law, and divine order. His answer to the ghosts of revolution? A piece of parchment called La Charte Constitutionnelle de 1814. You watch the king's trembling hand guide a quill across its pages. The courtiers applaud politely. The air smells of wax and irony. France shall have a constitution, he declares, pausing for effect, granted freely by her king. You almost chuckle at the phrasing. Not negotiated, not earned, but granted. It's the political equivalent of a cat dropping a dead bird on your doorstep. Technically a gift, though you're not sure how to thank him. Still, the Charter of 1814 looks progressive on the surface. It guarantees civil equality before the law, protects property gained during the Revolution, and even recognizes religious tolerance. Quite a miracle for a Bourbon. The king's subjects are equal before the law, one article proclaims, while another adds discreetly, the king alone proposes and enacts laws. You tilt your head, sensing that democracy has just been promised and strangled in the same sentence. Historians still argue whether Louis intended this as genuine reform or a clever disguise for absolutism. Whatever his motives, the Charter becomes France's fragile bridge between revolution and restoration, a bridge built from mismatched stones. In practice, it creates a bicameral legislature, a chamber of peers stuffed with nobles old enough to remember powdered wigs, and a chamber of deputies, elected by a suffrage so tiny it could fit in the king's waistcoat pocket. Barely 1% of the male population can vote, and the qualifications favor the rich, the titled, and the docile. You imagine a Paris cobbler laughing as he hears that owning land is now a requirement for having opinions. At court, Louis XVIII smiles serenely. You see, he tells visiting diplomats, I have reconciled liberty with monarchy. The diplomats nod, impressed. After 25 years of upheaval, they'll believe anything that doesn't explode. Meanwhile, royal censors quietly return to work, crossing out paragraphs in newspapers and prosecuting editors who forget their manners. The king's signature may glow with constitutional grace, but his police still wear the same scowls. One afternoon, you pass a print shop near Rue du Bac. The smell of ink and hot metal fills the air. The printer shows you a draft of a liberal pamphlet praising the Charter's potential. If interpreted generously, it says. Before the ink even dries, gendarmes burst in, seizing the pages as seditious. The printer shrugs. I've been arrested 3 times this year, he sighs, but at least the Charter gives me the right to complain about it. You can't decide whether to laugh or salute. The gift nature of the charter becomes a running joke among Parisian satirists. One cartoon shows the king handing the constitution to France, depicted as Marianne in chains, saying, "Here, I return your liberty. Don't wrinkle it." Another shows a noble reading the charter upside down, while a commoner whispers, "It reads the same both ways." You smirk at the boldness. Humor, it seems, has survived more regimes than any law ever could. Yet there's something undeniably modern in this paper monarchy. The king swears an oath to uphold rights, a concept unthinkable under his ancestors. Freedom of religion stands alongside Catholic primacy. The Napoleonic Code remains intact, and property redistribution from the Revolution is confirmed. Imagine being a farmer who bought church land in 1795. You'd sleep easier now, knowing no bishop can demand it back. For many middle-class citizens, that assurance matters more than lofty principles. You attend a session of the Chamber of Deputies out of curiosity. The hall buzzes with cautious debate. Liberal members quote Montesquieu and Locke. Conservatives quote scripture and nostalgia. Each side talks about liberty, but defines it differently. One speaker thunders, "Liberty without faith is anarchy." Another retorts, "Faith without liberty is tyranny." Both receive polite applause from the same men who will dine together afterward. Politics in Restoration France is theater with expensive costumes. Louis XVIII listens from his palace, satisfied that talk, at least, keeps swords sheathed. The deputies, however, learn that their role is mostly decorative. The king retains control over ministers, foreign policy, and the army. He can dissolve the chamber at will, like blowing out a candle. "The charter gives us a voice," jokes one deputy, "but the king keeps the earplugs." A curious little anecdote emerges around this time. Louis insists on keeping the throne of Napoleon's Senate chamber, the one carved with imperial eagles, simply replacing them with embroidered fleur-de-lis. When asked why, he replies, "Good chairs are hard to come by." You wonder if that line is practical wisdom or Bourbon satire at its finest. Despite the charter's flaws, the French people, those who can read it anyway, take a cautious pride in it. After decades of arbitrary rule and revolution, even symbolic constraints on royal power feel refreshing. But freedom is like perfume. Once released, you can't recork the bottle. Intellectual salons reawaken. Newspapers skirt the edges of censorship with double meanings and clever puns. A columnist writes, "The charter sleeps, but it dreams of liberty." The next day, his column disappears, proof that at least someone's reading. The church, regaining influence, watches all this with a mixture of alarm and opportunity. Bishops regain their stipends. Priests bless royal processions. Confessionals fill with whispers about politics disguised as sins. The Vatican approves. Voltaire rolls in his grave. You attend Mass one Sunday and hear a sermon praising the divine mercy that restored France to her natural kings. The congregation murmurs Amen, though several people's mouths stay closed. Still, not all hearts are cynical. In small towns, the charter's arrival brings hope. Teachers hang framed copies in classrooms. Mayors boast that France has entered an age of laws, not decrees. A few even celebrate public Charter Day festivals, balloons, wine, music, until the police quietly discourage such enthusiasm. The king's gift, it seems, is to be admired but never touched. Historians still debate how the charter should be judged. Some call it the cornerstone of modern French constitutionalism. Others dismiss it as camouflage for monarchy's survival. But perhaps both are true. By pretending to share power, Louis XVIII accidentally teaches his people how to demand it. Each clause, each restriction becomes a seed of expectation. In the cafes, you overhear a joke spreading like wildfire. The charter is our new mistress, beautiful, elusive, and the king doesn't want us to see her. Even the police laugh before they remember their duty. Beneath the humor lies a growing truth. The revolution's ideas are no longer whispered by radicals but murmured by bankers, lawyers, and journalists, the respectable middle France that no regime can long ignore.
One evening, as dusk falls over Paris, you see a young student writing by candlelight. He's copying the charter by hand, line by line, as if memorizing scripture. Why, you ask? He looks up, eyes shining. Because they may take the paper away, but not the words. You nod, realizing that the real revolution isn't in the streets this time. It's in the minds that refuse to forget.
And so, the charter stands, both promise and paradox. A royal gift meant to pacify a people who've already tasted freedom. The ink dries, but tension thickens. Liberty has been acknowledged, but ownership remains contested. As you leave the echoing halls of the palace, you can almost hear the faint scratching of future pens. Journalists, deputies, rebels, all sharpening their quills for the next chapter in France's long argument with itself. You wake to the murmur of bureaucrats, not soldiers now, nor revolutionaries shouting in the streets, but clerks, administrators, and inspectors scratching quills across parchment. The empire is gone, but its rhythm remains, a humming machine that even kings dare not stop. France, under Louis XVIII, is supposed to be reborn as a monarchy of order and grace. Yet as you wander through the corridors of government offices, you realize something quietly astonishing. Napoleon's ghost never left. It just changed uniforms. At the Ministry of the Interior, a prefect in crisp black coat gestures proudly at rows of files stacked with mathematical precision. Each dossier contains census data, tax reports, police surveillance, lists of births and deaths, all compiled under Napoleonic guidelines. The king may sign the decrees, but the empire's paperwork runs the realm. One official jokes, "His Majesty rules France. We, however, administer it." You can almost hear Napoleon smirking from St. Helena. Historians still argue whether Louis XVIII truly understood how deeply the imperial system had taken root. Many believe he simply lacked the energy to reform it. Others suggest he knew that dismantling it would be political suicide. Either way, the outcome is clear. France remains a centralized state, efficient, hierarchical, and suspiciously modern for a supposedly restored kingdom. The prefects, the emperor's once loyal governors, now report to the crown, though they still speak the language of progress rather than piety. You pass through a provincial town hall where the tricolor is banned, but the bureaucratic procedures are pure Bonaparte. A mayor explains that his orders come from Paris, not from local nobles. "The revolution and the emperor taught us one thing," he says with a shrug. "We are all subjects of paperwork." The man chuckles at his own joke, stamping a document with bureaucratic pride. It's a peculiar paradox. Louis XVIII despises Napoleon's memory, but cannot govern without his methods. The Napoleonic Code, his most enduring legacy, remains untouched. You find a copy on a judge's desk, its leather binding worn, its articles as sharp as bayonets. Property rights, civil marriage, secular courts, all born from Enlightenment ideals now sanctified by royal decree. Even the king's enemies must admit the code works. It's logical, efficient, and as French as wine and complaint. A quirky tidbit. Some ultra-royalists try to Christianize the code by inserting new moral clauses, banning divorce outright, or invoking divine law. The jurists respond with elegant legal poetry, arguing that what God has joined, bureaucracy may at least supervise. The amendment fails spectacularly. France, it seems, has grown attached to its secular habits. Elsewhere, the military too bears Napoleon's mark. The white Bourbon flag may flutter over barracks, but the regimental drills still echo the emperor's discipline. Officers whisper in mess halls about campaigns in Spain and Russia, their loyalty torn between past glory and present duty. Louis XVIII tries to suppress imperial symbols. No eagles, no tricolor cockades, but discipline dies hard. In private, Veterans toast the old days, calling themselves sleeping grenadiers.
You attend one of these quiet gatherings at a smoky cafe near the Invalides. The men raise tin cups instead of crystal, muttering half-remembered slogans. Honor and the fatherland. The emperor lives in us. One man, missing an arm, insists that Napoleon will return on the first storm wind. The others laugh, but it's the kind of laughter that hides longing. A nearby policeman pretends not to hear. The Bourbon regime tolerates such sentiment for now. It's safer to let veterans dream than to provoke them.
Meanwhile, the schools, another imperial inheritance, continue molding citizens with standardized lessons. Centralized education, born under Napoleon, survives the Restoration almost intact. Teachers recite catechisms of arithmetic and grammar that sound suspiciously secular. The church is invited back into classrooms, of course, but the children's handwriting still follows the same Napoleonic drills: order, clarity, obedience to the rule. It's ironic. Louis XVIII may claim divine right, but his subjects think in bureaucratic paragraphs. At night, the king muses about this balance between old and new. In his private correspondence, he admits that the revolution has changed everything, even the air we breathe. He's right. The monarchy may have returned, but the mentality of the ancien regime has not. France is no longer a patchwork of provinces ruled by nobles. It's a single body governed by a brain in Paris. The revolution and empire, for all their violence, have fused France into something durable and dangerous to kings who mistake silence for loyalty. You stroll along the Seine one evening, passing by the Palais de Justice. Inside, a trial unfolds under the code's strict logic. Impartial judges, written statutes, no appeals to divine mercy. It's law as reason, not as ritual. Watching it, you feel that France's real monarch is not a man, but a system. A machine of merit and measurement that hums beneath every ministry and courtroom. The king may occupy the throne, but the code sits on every desk. One historian later writes that the Bourbon Restoration was a monarchy served by Napoleonic functionaries, administering revolutionary institutions. It sounds absurd, but it's true. The nobles return to their chateaus, dreaming of hunting parties and divine favor, while the clerks quietly run the country. The machine keeps humming, even when its operators change uniforms. A moment of humor. A royal edict orders portraits of the king to hang in every prefect's office. When inspectors visit, they find that half the offices still display Napoleon's silhouette behind the new portrait, the canvas literally nailed over the old frame. The prefects explain innocently that they saw no need to waste a good picture. It becomes a national metaphor. Bourbon France is Napoleon's empire wearing a powdered wig. Yet the continuity is not purely mechanical. It's emotional too. The empire had taught millions that merit, not birth, could elevate a man. Under the Bourbons, titles and privileges creep back, but the memory of opportunity lingers like a stubborn echo. Veterans, clerks, engineers all believe, deep down, that their worth was once measured by achievement, not ancestry. That faith may be sleeping, but it's not dead. You can sense it in the restless energy of the streets, the impatience beneath polite applause. Historians still debate how deliberate this was. Did Louis XVIII consciously preserve Napoleon's system to maintain control, or did the system simply refuse to die? Perhaps it doesn't matter. France has discovered efficiency, and efficiency is a hard habit to unlearn. Every tax record, every standardized road sign, every prefect's letter builds a France more modern than its monarch. You pause at a crossroads outside Paris, where two milestones stand side by side, one carved under the old regime, the other under Napoleon. The older stone lists local lords and provinces. The newer one gives distance in kilometers, cold and precise. A peasant leading his mule glances at both, shrugs, and says, "The emperor's marker is easier to read." There, in that simple remark, lies the truth of post-war France. People care less for crowns than for clarity.
A small anecdote from 1817 drives the point home. When a flood destroys a bridge in Burgundy, local nobles petition the king for funds to rebuild. Weeks pass. Nothing happens. Then, the prefect, an ex-Napoleonic officer, organizes the work himself, drafts engineers, and finishes the bridge before the royal decree even arrives. When reprimanded for acting without permission, he bows and says, "Majesty, I merely followed procedure." The king, amused, lets it pass. The peasants, grateful, name the bridge Pont de l'Empereur. The lilies may rule, but the eagles still build. By the early 1820s, this uneasy coexistence defines the nation. Monarchy provides legitimacy. Napoleonic structures provide functionality. It's a marriage of necessity, held together by habit. Yet you can feel the tension building beneath the surface. Each decree, each audit, each bureaucrat in black becoming a quiet argument against the feudal past. France hums with paperwork and quiet ambition. Roads improve, trade expands, cities grow. But in drawing rooms, the aristocracy frets that the country they reclaimed no longer recognizes them. The people respect efficiency, one duchess complains, but where is reverence? You sip your wine and think, reverence is hard to file under urgent. The Restoration tries to freeze time, yet every office clock ticks forward. Every stamped form, every copied record whispers that progress, once born, never truly dies. As the candlelight fades over the king's desk, you sense that Louis XVIII has inherited not a kingdom, but a momentum, and that momentum, sooner or later, will outrun him. You can feel the tension thickening like the Paris fog. Royalist white lilies on one side, revolutionary tricolors hidden in drawers on the other. The year is creeping toward 1816, and you walk the narrow streets between candlelit salons and smoky cafes, where France's soul is being contested, one whispered argument at a time. Inside the drawing rooms of the wealthy, the air smells of perfume and politics. Aristocrats in silks and lace speak with the solemnity of martyrs returned from exile. They call themselves les ultras, ultra-royalists, more royalist than the king himself. The revolution was Satan's work, says one marquis, swirling his wine like it's holy water. France must atone. Across from him, a young liberal journalist replies calmly, France already paid, with blood and reason both. The marquis snorts. The clock ticks. No one wins. These salons become verbal battlefields. The ultras dream of restoring the divine hierarchy. Nobles, priests, and kings in eternal harmony, preferably with no voters at all. Liberals, educated bourgeois men of the new century, dream instead of a constitutional monarchy that actually means something. Between them stands Louis XVIII, too cautious to offend either, too tired to satisfy both. He promises reconciliation but governs by hesitation. Historians still argue whether the king's moderation was wisdom or weakness. To the ultras, he's a coward. To the liberals, a hypocrite. Yet perhaps he simply senses what neither side admits, that France has two hearts beating in opposite directions. You drift through one salon after another. At the Duchess de Duras', talk of virtue and monarchy mingles with gossip about the latest scandal in the Chamber of Deputies. At Benjamin Constant's, liberal intellectuals quote Rousseau, sip cheap wine, and argue that freedom of the press is the soul of civilization. The same city hosts both conversations, sometimes in adjoining buildings. You can almost hear Voltaire and the Virgin Mary arguing through the walls. Meanwhile, out on the streets, common folk watch these disputes with amused indifference. The baker cares less for ideology than for flour prices, the ex-soldier for his unpaid pension. To them, politics is a play performed by men in wigs, while life remains stubbornly practical. Still, tension trickles downward. Pamphlets circulate. Tavern jokes turn subversive.
One popular rhyme goes, "They changed the flag, but not the tax." Even the illiterate laugh.
The government senses danger. Louis XVIII's ministers, led by the cautious Duc de Richelieu, attempt balance. They reintroduce limited press freedom one month, then enforce censorship the next. They restore noble privileges quietly, but keep Napoleonic laws loudly. It's a dance of contradiction. Every 2 steps forward toward liberty, 1 curtsy back toward absolutism. In the countryside, vengeance simmers. Ultra-royalist gangs calling themselves White Terror bands attack known Bonapartists and former revolutionaries. In Avignon, Nîmes, and Toulouse, houses are burned, veterans lynched, widows harassed for refusing to hang the white flag. The king condemns the violence in public but does little to stop it. It's easier to let the ultras exhaust their fury than to risk alienating them. France learns again how peace can bruise like war. One quirky tidbit from this period: a royal decree bans playing certain popular songs in public, particularly La Marseillaise. Musicians respond with coded resistance. They play it backwards, disguise it as a dance tune, or whistle it under their breath while pretending it's a hymn. In Paris theaters, audiences hum the forbidden melody softly when censors aren't listening. Music becomes a whispering revolution of its own. At the same time, royalist newspapers grow venomous. They print lists of supposed Bonapartists still employed by the state, calling for their dismissal, or worse. "Purge the nest of serpents," one headline demands. Liberals fire back with satire, publishing anonymous essays mocking the nobility's obsession with ancestry. "If our ancestors were great," one pamphlet reads, "perhaps we should let them govern from their graves." The authorities confiscate copies, of course, but every seizure seems to multiply them. Louis XVIII tries to calm the storm by reshuffling cabinets, appointing moderate ministers like Decazes, who speaks of progress in a whisper. Decazes becomes the king's favorite, a smooth-tongued reformer who believes France can be modern and monarchical at once. The throne must lean on the nation, he tells the king, not crush it. The ultras hiss. The liberals nod cautiously, and the people wait. The Chamber of Deputies, elected under that minuscule 1% franchise, proves a theater of absurdity. The ultra-majority of 1815, nicknamed the Chambre Introuvable, the unfindable chamber, behaves like a parliament of time travelers from 1750. They propose restoring tithes to the clergy, censoring theaters, and re-establishing noble privileges. One even suggests exiling the spirit of Voltaire. When the king dissolves the chamber the next year, Paris breathes a sigh of relief. For once, Louis shows a spark of courage, but courage brings consequence. The ultras accuse Decazes and the king of betraying divine right. Liberals, though mildly encouraged, see that reform moves at a snail's pace. France becomes a pressure cooker, sealed by etiquette. You walk through the Palais Bourbon, where deputies debate, their speeches so polite you can barely hear the fury beneath. "France must be moral again," declares one. "France must be modern again," answers another. Neither side notices the chambermaids outside rolling their eyes. Historians still debate whether the Restoration's instability came from ideology or from simple exhaustion. After all, France had endured revolution, empire, invasion, occupation. Perhaps it was inevitable that peace felt unnatural. But as one cynical Parisian says over coffee, when peace begins to feel like punishment, trouble isn't far away. You step into a bookshop near the Sorbonne, where clandestine pamphlets hide behind religious tracts. The owner slides you one titled Le Spectre de l'Empereur. It's printed anonymously, full of sentimental tributes to Napoleon, comparing him to Prometheus chained by jealous kings. The king's police confiscate hundreds, but thousands more appear. The emperor's image, banned, burned, and buried, keeps resurfacing like an unsinkable myth. A curious footnote: police reports note the rise of Napoleonic toasts at weddings and funerals.
Guests raise their glasses, pretending to honor the bride or the dead, but the real toast is whispered, to the one who made us great. In taverns, waiters wink knowingly. France's heart belongs to no one entirely, not to the Bourbons, not to the Bonapartes, but to the idea of glory itself.
By 1818, economic hardship deepens discontent. Grain prices rise after poor harvests. Factories lay off workers, and veterans wander, begging in rags. The monarchy funds lavish balls, while widows pawn their medals. Newspapers, censored but inventive, publish coded criticisms using metaphors of weather. The royal sky remains cloudy with intermittent thunder. Everyone gets the joke. You find yourself in a smoky back room of a Lyon cafe, where radical students gather under flickering oil lamps. They speak of freedom and fraternity, but their voices are hushed. One sketches plans for a Republican uprising, another warns of spies. Their leader, a young man named Manuel, insists that France must finish the revolution it began. You lean closer. The words sound reckless, yet inevitable. Later, walking home, you hear church bells toll for the Feast of St. Louis. Above the rooftops, the white flag ripples faintly. You realize how fragile the Bourbon illusion has become. A monarchy pretending to rule an empire that exists only in memory. Beneath the manners and decrees, France still hums with Napoleon's rhythm and Rousseau's dream. And somewhere, beyond the narrow streets, a future monarch, Charles X, is already watching, sharpening his beliefs, and waiting for his turn to drag France backward again. For now, though, the city sleeps uneasily, lulled by waltzes and watchmen's calls, dreaming of eagles that never truly die. The morning light in Paris feels filtered, as though passing through gauze, pretty but faintly suffocating. The city wakes not to revolution, but to regulation. Royal decrees arrive daily, heavy with wax seals, dictating what can be printed, sung, worn, or even remembered. You walk past a newspaper office on the Rue de Croissant, just as two gendarmes pin a notice to the door. By order of His Majesty's government, this publication is suspended for offenses against public morality. The crowd reads it in silence, pretending indifference, but their eyes burn with quiet laughter. Everyone knows public morality means disagreeing with the crown. Inside the shuttered presses, journalists work anyway, printing pamphlets that fit inside coat pockets. These papier de poche circulate hand to hand, more precious than coins. They tell jokes about bishops who censor love poems and generals who censor the weather forecast for fear of storms. The Bourbon regime, desperate to control its image, has decided to muzzle its mirror. You feel the walls closing in. Even literature must choose sides. The government bans revolutionary works and orders libraries to remove Voltaire, Rousseau, and anything bearing a whiff of sarcasm. Booksellers disguise banned titles under false covers. Candide becomes catechism for the virtuous youth. Some librarians even host secret reading nights, candlelit gatherings where guests take turns reading contraband passages aloud, whispering as if in church. You attend one such evening and watch a young woman, her face glowing in the candlelight, read Rousseau's line, "Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains." The audience exhales like they've witnessed a miracle. Historians still argue whether censorship strengthened or weakened the regime. It certainly made the forbidden words sound holier. Every banned poem became prophecy. Every confiscated newspaper, a relic. Even loyalists began to tire of the endless prohibitions. One royal advisor supposedly complained, "We have silenced the press so thoroughly that even good news cannot be heard." The tricolor flag, that symbol of revolution and empire, remains banned as well. White banners of the Bourbons flutter from government buildings, stitched with golden lilies. The tricolor's colors, blue, white, red, are declared seditious. Tailors must seek permission before using those hues together. Painters avoid them out of fear,
but you notice them sneaking back in subtler ways. A blue scarf here, a red ribbon there, a white shirt unbuttoned just enough to reveal loyalty beneath linen. France begins speaking in color-coded whispers.
A quirky anecdote. One Paris pastry chef creates a dessert of 3 layers, raspberry, cream, and blueberry, and calls it Cake of the Fatherland. The police shut his shop down within a week. When he reopens, the same cake is renamed Royal Pudding. Everyone buys it anyway, smiling into their spoons. Beneath the surface, censorship breeds creativity. Playwrights turn their dramas into allegories of liberty and tyranny, swapping kings for mythic heroes and censors for jealous gods. Musicians compose harmless-sounding marches with melodies that mimic La Marseillaise backward. In private gatherings, actors recite band lines from memory, their applause hushed but fervent. It's a peculiar sort of rebellion, art as camouflage. But repression works both ways. The ultras, those hardline royalists who believe moderation is treason, use censorship to tighten their grip. They fill the press with sermons about loyalty, family, and faith. Newspapers like La Quotidienne print poems comparing Louis XVIII to Solomon and Napoleon to Lucifer. You half expect them to declare that bread prices are higher because God prefers it that way. The king himself, however, grows uneasy. He knows that censorship turns sympathy into suspicion. When too many voices are silenced, whispers become roars. His minister de Casa warns him, "Majesty, the muzzle will one day bark." The king sighs but changes little. For a monarch trying to balance between heaven and revolution, silence feels safer than speech. You wander into a cafe one afternoon and find yourself among clerks, students, and minor officials. They discuss the latest restrictions over watered-down coffee. "No tricolor ribbons at weddings," says one. "No plays without police review," adds another. A third laughs. "At this rate, even ghosts will need permission to haunt." The table erupts in muffled giggles. Humor, at least, is still free, though not for long. In Lyon and Marseille, printers defy the bans more openly. Police raids seize presses by night, yet new ones appear by morning, hidden behind bakeries or under tavern floors. A young typesetter tells you, "If they cut off our hands, we'll print with our feet." You believe him. Words are oxygen here, and no regime can ration air forever. Meanwhile, royal censors grow paranoid. They scour the arts for hidden messages, convinced that subversion lurks in every brushstroke and rhyme. One inspector orders the destruction of a tapestry because its pattern resembles the seditious colors of the tricolor when seen by candlelight. The absurdity spreads faster than dissent. Historians still debate whether this paranoia stemmed from fear of Bonapartism or fear of modernity itself. Perhaps both. The revolution had unleashed something terrifying to monarchs. The idea that the people might think for themselves. Controlling thought becomes an obsession, as if words were gunpowder waiting for a spark. You visit a printing shop disguised as a bindery. Its owner shows you a hidden compartment behind a false wall filled with pamphlets printed on cheap gray paper. Titles like The People's Mirror and Letters from St. Helena wink up at you. He explains that each pamphlet travels across France in barrels labeled olive oil. "They can stop my ink," he says, "but not my ideas." His fingers are stained black to the knuckles. You shake his hand and realize ink can look a lot like courage. On the anniversary of Waterloo, the government forbids any mention of the battle. Yet the people remember anyway. In back alleys, candles appear on windowsills. Some say they burn for peace, others for pride, but everyone knows they burn for him. Napoleon becomes the unmentionable presence at every dinner table, a ghost too vast to censor. The police, overwhelmed, invent new offenses like Bonapartist sympathy and revolutionary silence. Imagine that, being arrested for not saying enough. In one report, a prefect describes a tailor who looked defiant while sewing. Another arrests a bookseller because his cat was named Caesar.
The absurdity borders on comedy, though few are laughing loudly.
One evening, you attend a play permitted by the censors.
A dull tragedy about loyalty and divine justice. The audience dozes until a single line, a character lamenting, "Once we had heroes instead of masters," draws a sudden wave of applause. The censors shift uncomfortably in their seats. The playwright is arrested the next morning, but the line survives in whispers, quoted in cafes and schools, echoing far longer than any royal edict.
The regime tries to combat this with propaganda, celebrations of national harmony, fireworks for royal birthdays, and parades through streets lined with white bunting. The ceremonies are beautiful, sterile, and faintly desperate. You notice children watching the pomp with confusion, tugging their parents' sleeves. "Where's the eagle?" Their parents hush them quickly, glancing over their shoulders. Even loyalists begin to crack. Some moderate royalists argue that reconciliation, not repression, is the key to survival. They plead with the crown to relax censorship, to let citizens breathe. But the ultras shout louder, calling them traitors in velvet gloves. It's a battle between fear and fatigue, and fear still rules. A peculiar rumor spreads. In the royal kitchens, the chef secretly uses blue serviettes and red napkin rings, claiming it's just coincidence. The court laughs nervously. Even at dinner, the revolution's colors can't stay away. Through all this, the people adapt. They learn to read between lines, to turn obedience into irony. France becomes a nation fluent in subtext. When officials declare that all is calm, everyone nods knowingly. It's code for something's burning. By 1819, you sense the pressure mounting. The king's health wanes. The ultras grow bolder. Liberals plot quietly in their cafes. Censorship, meant to smother unrest, has only spread the embers wider. Silence, it turns out, can be the loudest sound in France. One night, as rain slicks the cobblestones, you pass a shuttered shop where someone has scrawled 3 words in chalk before the police can erase them. Nous souvenons. We remember. The phrase glows faintly under the lamplight, defiant and tender all at once. You pause, let the rain wash over your coat and think. Revolutions begin not with cannons, but with the courage to keep remembering. You feel it first as a murmur, low, persistent, and strangely musical. Paris hums with forbidden nostalgia. Though Napoleon has been dead for years, his name floats through the streets like incense. You hear it whispered in taverns, carved into bridge railings, sung softly by street performers who pretend it's just another ballad. The Bourbon monarchy may hold the throne, but in the hearts of the people, the emperor still rides. You wander into a working-class quarter near Montmartre. The tavern there is dim, smoky, and full of stories. Veterans with weathered faces trade memories like currency. "He looked every man in the eye," says one, slamming his tankard down for emphasis. Another adds, "He made us somebody." They toast to the little corporal, careful not to raise their voices too high. Bonapartist nostalgia can still earn you a police visit, but the toasts keep coming. At nearby tables, the younger crowd listens in awe. To them, Napoleon isn't a man. They've grown up with the legend, not the reality. In their minds, he's half mortal, half myth. A general who spoke to destiny, a conqueror who shared bread with soldiers, a magician who could make kings tremble. They sing drinking songs about him, mixing fact and fantasy until you can't tell which is which. One particularly popular tune goes, "He sleeps beyond the seas, but dreams of France." Historians still argue whether this Bonapartist revival was spontaneous or carefully cultivated. Some say it began with soldiers' clubs and veterans associations. Others blame disillusioned bureaucrats and frustrated liberals who saw in Napoleon the symbol of meritocracy. What's certain is that by 1820, France's working classes no longer feared the emperor. They missed him. You step outside and the city feels alive with tiny rebellions.
In back alleys, cobblers wear tricolor laces in their boots. Seamstresses stitch hidden blue-white-red linings into coats. Painters hide eagles in church murals, tiny, invisible unless you know where to look. Even language changes. People start saying "le temps de l'empereur" as shorthand for efficiency, courage, glory. "We need a Napoleon" becomes the national sigh.
The police, of course, try to stamp it out. Prefects send reports warning of Bonapartist contamination. One even orders taverns to stop serving wine in cups engraved with the letter N. But the harder they push, the faster the myth multiplies. The emperor becomes not a person, but an idea. Equality, discipline, destiny. France itself. One evening, you attend a small musical gathering in a cafe near the Palais Royal. The pianist, pretending to play a harmless waltz, slips into a melody unmistakable to anyone with ears. The slow, proud rhythm of La Victoire est à nous. The room freezes. Then, one by one, glasses rise. No one sings. They don't need to. The music itself is treason enough. You notice a young gendarme at the door, hat pulled low. For a moment you think he'll report them, but instead he taps the rhythm quietly against his thigh. Even the enforcers are haunted. Rumors swirl through the city like autumn leaves. Some claim Napoleon's body wasn't buried at St. Helena at all, that the British lied, that he escaped disguised as a sailor and hides in America, or perhaps in a monastery in Corsica. Mothers tell their children bedtime stories. Be brave, and one day the emperor will return. The government's denials only fuel the fire. France begins living in two calendars, the king's and the emperor's imagined countdown to resurrection. A quirky detail. Shopkeepers sell small busts of Caesar or Alexander and wink knowingly. Everyone understands who they really represent. In one Paris toy shop, a wooden soldier doll dressed in blue becomes the year's best seller. The censors ban it. Within weeks, black market vendors sell thousands. Every nursery in France now contains a miniature Bonaparte, grinning beneath royal noses. But the Bonapartist myth isn't just nostalgia. It's a quiet form of opposition. Liberals and Republicans, though they once distrusted Napoleon's dictatorship, find his memory useful. He becomes a symbol of national strength against foreign humiliation, of unity against aristocratic privilege. To toast him is to defy the ultras without uttering a word of politics. Patriotism disguised as longing. That's the genius of it. You visit Lyon, where the legend burns brightest. In the silk workers' quarters, women embroider tiny bees, the old imperial emblem, onto handkerchiefs. At night, men gather in candlelit cellars to sing songs of the Grande Armée. They call themselves Les Amis de l'Aigle, Friends of the Eagle. Officially, they're just a cultural club. Unofficially, they're keeping a flame alive. Police infiltration fails. The officers sent to spy often end up joining. One rainy night, a veteran tells you a story whispered across France. "He'll come again," the man says, voice low. Not the same one, another Bonaparte. The blood doesn't vanish. You smile politely, not yet realizing how prophetic that will sound in 1848. For now, it's just another rumor, another way to keep hope warm. Historians still debate the psychology of this national obsession. Why did France cling so fiercely to a fallen emperor? Some point to humiliation, defeat at Waterloo, foreign occupation, the return of nobles who spoke of the people as children. Others argue that Napoleon embodied the revolution's promise without its chaos, order with opportunity, discipline with glory. Whatever the cause, France's new monarch finds himself haunted not by ghosts, but by popularity polls from beyond the grave. Louis XVIII grows wary. He tolerates small gestures of nostalgia, but fears open cult worship. The police seize busts, close cafes, and interrogate veterans. The more they repress, the stronger the myth becomes. You can almost hear the rhythm of resistance, soft, steady, unstoppable. One curious case reaches the newspapers. A tailor in Dijon is arrested for hosting secret toasts to the emperor's health. When interrogated, he smiles and says, "But I was only honoring the emperor of heaven." The court convicts him anyway. The people crown him a hero. Even royal propaganda accidentally feeds the legend. Plays meant to glorify the Bourbons feature lines comparing the king's mercy to Napoleon's might. Audiences cheer the wrong name. Painters ordered to depict the fall of tyranny instead produce heroic portraits of the defeated general, eyes burning with tragic nobility. A generation of artists raised on revolution and empire simply can't unlearn their muse, and so the empire sneaks back in the culture. Military fashion revives epaulettes and double-breasted coats. Schoolboys reenact battles at Austerlitz with wooden sabers. Poets turn the exile on Saint Helena into a saintly martyr, suffering for the sins of kings. The monarchy's attempt to erase him only canonizes him further. A detail you find irresistible. Around 1820, a baker in Toulon sells biscuits shaped like tiny bicorn hats. Locals call them les Napoleons. The prefect orders a ban. Within weeks, every town in Provence is selling them. You buy one yourself. It's sweet, flaky, and tastes faintly of rebellion. But the nostalgia isn't entirely romantic. Some remember the wars, the blood, the conscription, the endless funerals. "He gave us glory," says one widow in Marseille, "but he took my 3 sons." Her voice trembles between love and accusation. The Bonapartist myth, for all its glamour, carries grief in its bones. France mourns what it adored. Even so, the dream persists. Painters sketch the emperor's silhouette on cigarette papers. Actors slip his name into improvised lines. Lovers meet under the pretext of discussing military history. You realize France has invented a new form of protest, nostalgia as rebellion. It's softer than revolution, but more contagious. By 1821, when news of Napoleon's death finally arrives, Paris freezes. Bells toll softly, though no decree demands it. People wear black ribbons not for the king, but for the man who once outshone every king. Officially, mourning him is forbidden. Unofficially, the entire nation does. You stand by the Seine that night, watching candles drift downstream. Each one flickers like a heartbeat. Somewhere behind you, a man hums Partant pour la Syrie, that old imperial song. It's almost a lullaby now, tender and tired. You realize that this isn't just a memory, it's a foundation. Out of the emperor's shadow, modern France is being born, quietly, stubbornly, one whisper at a time. Historians still argue whether the Bourbons ever truly ruled France at all. From where you stand, it looks clear enough. They occupied the throne, yes, but Napoleon occupied the imagination. And imagination, you've learned tonight, is the one territory no army ever truly conquers. The candles have barely burned out from Napoleon's secret vigils when France stumbles once again into blood and vengeance. You can smell it before you see it. Gunpowder and damp stone, the familiar perfume of political fear. The year is 1816, maybe 1817, and what began as whispers of revenge now spills into the open. The peace Louis XVIII promised is dissolving into street brawls, assassinations, and midnight arrests. You walk through Avignon on a sweltering afternoon. The walls are whitewashed, but streaked with soot where torches burned last night. A crowd gathers in silence around a charred doorway. The family that lived there was accused of Bonapartist sympathies. Their crime? The father once wore his Legion of Honor medal to Sunday Mass. No one dares speak his name now, but the blackened stone tells the story. The White Terror, they call it. Ironic, since it stains everything it touches. In southern France, the ultra-royalists unleash their fury. They hunt Jacobins, Bonapartists, liberals, Protestants, anyone who doesn't toast the king loudly enough. Mobs of vedettes, royalist volunteers wearing white cockades, roam through Nîmes and Toulouse, shouting "Vive le Roi" as they smash windows and burn shops.
The authorities look away. Some even join in. You can almost hear the revolution laughing bitterly from its grave. The persecuted have become the persecutors. Historians still argue whether Louis XVIII condoned these purges or simply lost control of his loyalists. His ministers issue statements condemning violence, but justice moves at the speed of molasses. Dozens of Bonapartists are murdered before the crown even opens an inquiry. The king forgives, one ultra boasts, but we avenge. You can't decide which is more terrifying, royal apathy or fanatic loyalty. Meanwhile, conspiracies bloom like weeds. In Paris, students gather in attics, whispering of liberty and equality. In Lyon, silk workers pass around leaflets signed only with the letter N. In the army, disbanded officers meet by candlelight, pretending it's a card game while discussing uprising routes. Their leader, a fiery colonel named Mallet, once tried to seize power with forged orders during Napoleon's reign. He failed spectacularly, but left behind an idea that a bold lie can shake empires. His ghost now inspires dreamers who think France might still be awakened with the right spark. One night, you follow such a meeting to a cellar beneath a wine shop. The men speak in hushed tones. Republicans, Bonapartists, even disillusioned monarchists. One proposes assassinating a royal minister. Another argues for patience. A third raises his glass. We will not kill kings. We will make them unnecessary. You almost clap, but the candle flickers out and the group scatters at the sound of boots on the stairs. They vanish like smoke, leaving behind only the smell of cheap Bordeaux and danger. In Lyon, 1817 brings open revolt. Workers and veterans march beneath the rain, carrying sticks carved into mock rifles. Their banner shows not the tricolor, but a plain red cloth, the color of hunger. The uprising fails within days. The leaders are hanged or sent to prison hulks, yet the memory lingers. A factory foreman whispers, "Next time, we'll have real guns." The monarchy calls it treason. The people call it rehearsal. One quirky detail from the archives. When authorities raid a suspected Bonapartist club in Marseille, they find not weapons, but a stage set. A model battlefield made from bread dough, with tiny figures of Napoleon's marshals. The members were rehearsing speeches for a play titled The Return of Glory. Every man in the room is arrested. Every copy of the script is burned. But one soldier later rewrites it from memory and circulates it secretly, renaming it The Spirit of France. Art, again, outlives censorship. Back in Paris, the tension grows unbearable. Every assassination, real or rumored, feeds paranoia. In 1816, a royal official named Fualdès is found murdered in Rodez. The press explodes with theories. Was it Bonapartists? Royalists? A crime of passion? Trials drag on for years, turning into a national obsession. It's as if France, uncertain whom to blame for its misery, decides to blame everyone. You can't cross a bridge without hearing gossip. The Duc de Berry is next, says one baker. The king will abdicate, predicts another. The cafes hum with conspiracy. People speak in metaphors. The candle burns low. The lilies wilt, because direct criticism could mean prison. And then, one winter night in 1820, prophecy fulfills itself. The Duc de Berry, nephew of Louis XVIII and heir to the throne, leaves the opera with his wife. Snowflakes fall on his carriage. As he steps toward the curb, a man lunges forward and plunges a dagger into his chest. "Death to the Bourbons," he cries. The assassin, Louis-Pierre Louvel, a saddler and former imperial guard, is quickly overpowered. But it's too late. The Duke bleeds to death in his wife's arms before dawn. The city freezes. You feel it in the silence. No shouting, no riots. Just the stunned breath of history changing direction. The ultras seize the moment. The liberals have murdered monarchy itself, they roar, though Louvel acted alone. Newspapers scream for vengeance. Churches toll their bells not in mourning, but in warning. The revolution still lives, they say, and it wears a worker's apron.
Louis XVIII weeps publicly, something kings rarely do. His health falters, his will collapses. Into that void steps his brother, the Count of Artois, the future Charles X. You watch him at the funeral, eyes blazing beneath his powdered wig. He sees not tragedy, but opportunity. This, he whispers to a confidant, is God's lesson to France. You can already hear the echo of coming tyranny in those words. The funeral procession winds through Paris under an iron sky. Soldiers line the streets, sabers drawn. Windows are shuttered, though faces peek between curtains. A woman drops a single tricolor flower onto the cobblestones. A gendarme stomps it flat. Somewhere, a boy picks it up and hides it in his coat. You wonder who he'll grow up to be. Historians still argue whether Louvel's act was madness or martyrdom. What's clear is its consequence. The ultras take full control. Decazes, the moderate minister, is forced to resign. Press freedom vanishes overnight. Deputies who speak of compromise find themselves accused of regicide. France is no longer walking a tightrope between old and new. It's tumbling backward into divine right. The violence spreads beyond politics. In the South, Catholic mobs attack Protestant villages under the pretense of avenging the Duke. In Paris, anyone suspected of liberal sympathies faces harassment, dismissal, or worse. A journalist jokes darkly, the revolution guillotined heads, the restoration guillotines ideas. You meet an old Napoleonic officer in exile near the Swiss border. His uniform is faded, his medals tarnished. We fought for a future, he sighs, and they gave us ghosts. He lifts his glass to the memory of fallen comrades. When he drinks, you notice his hand trembles, but not from age, from rage contained too long. One small but telling scene. A child draws in chalk on a wall. A simple sketch of a hat, a bicorn. A soldier sees it and erases it roughly. None of that, he mutters. The child looks up and asks, but why is the hat dangerous? The soldier doesn't answer. You do, because memory, once outlawed, becomes a weapon. By 1821, as news of Napoleon's death reaches France, the nation's mood curdles. Royalists rejoice, liberals mourn, moderates sigh in relief. But even the ultras can't fully celebrate. They know they've lost their favorite enemy. Without the emperor's ghost to blame, they must now face the emptiness of their own rule. The people, still hungry and restless, turn their frustration toward the living instead of the dead. At dusk, you walk along the Seine. The water reflects a sky divided, half gold, half storm. Somewhere upriver, a church bell tolls for evening mass. Somewhere else, a blacksmith hammers steel into shape. Those sounds together, faith and labor, are France itself. Contradictory, resilient, alive. The revolution's embers still glow under Bourbon snow. You think of that boy who pocketed the crushed tricolor flower at the Duke's funeral. He's out there now, grown a little taller, dreaming in colors the monarchy forbids. He doesn't know it yet, but one day he'll march again, beneath new banners, against old fears. And as the light fades, you whisper to yourself, France isn't finished, it's only rehearsing. The streets of Paris are draped in black crepe. Bells toll from every church tower, not just for the Duc de Berry's funeral, but for something larger, the death of moderation itself. You stand amid the silent crowd watching the procession, realizing that this is not mourning, it's a coronation of vengeance. The white flags hang limp in the wind, their lilies almost gray against the winter sky. Somewhere behind those symbols, the ultras are smiling. The assassination has given them everything they ever wanted: a martyr, a mandate, and a terrified king too frail to resist. Within weeks, France feels transformed, less like a monarchy tempered by law, more like a sermon dressed in uniform. Clergymen thunder from pulpits about divine punishment. Newspapers cry that God has cursed the revolution's children. The liberals, who once debated reforms in polite tones, now whisper in code or flee abroad. The Restoration, born on compromise, is mutating into a crusade. At court,
Charles, Count of Artois, Louis XVIII's younger brother, moves through the corridors like a shadow of absolutism past. His voice is calm, but his eyes burn with conviction. He sees divine design in every misfortune. To him, the Duke's blood demands purification. The throne and the altar must stand or fall together, he tells a gathering of bishops. They nod so vigorously that you can almost hear their mitres rattle. You notice a curious reversal taking shape. In Napoleon's day, religion had been a private affair, useful for discipline, but secondary to the state. Now, the state kneels before religion. Crosses return to classroom walls. Church bells regain their legal privilege to ring whenever they please, and sermons seep into school lessons. It's as though France's clock has been wound backward 50 years. One morning you visit a school near Rouen. The teacher, once a civil servant of the empire, now opens class with prayers and catechism. He looks weary, not pious. They told me to teach reading, he says softly, so now I teach the gospel. The children recite verses they don't understand, their wooden shoes scraping the floor in rhythm. You can tell their obedience is mechanical. The revolution's spirit hasn't been erased, only repainted. Historians still argue whether Louis XVIII truly supported this reactionary swing or simply lacked the strength to oppose it. His health worsens by the year. Gout confines him to his chair. Ministers whisper around him like caretakers of a fragile relic. The real power lies increasingly with his brother and the ultras. They push laws through Parliament that would make Richelieu blush. The first is the law of sacrilege, proposed in 1825 but conceived years earlier. It makes blasphemy, a careless joke, a vandalized crucifix, a bread wafer dropped by accident, punishable by death. The liberal deputies protest that France no longer burns heretics, but the ultras shrug. "We are not burning men," says one count. "We are saving souls." You think of Voltaire's ghost lighting a cigarette somewhere in disbelief. A quirky story circulates about the trial of a teenage boy accused of mocking a priest. The court debates for hours whether the insult constitutes verbal sacrilege. The boy is acquitted, but the judge's robes smell faintly of fear. France's justice, once the pride of the Napoleonic Code, now bows before incense. Even the arts fall under suspicion. Painters are warned to avoid pagan sensuality. Theater censors ban comedies that make priests look foolish, so almost every comedy. The Romantic movement, still young, finds itself at war with the pulpit. In attic garrets, poets like Hugo and Lamartine begin writing verses about freedom, disguised as hymns. The censors read the first lines and smile, missing the thunder hidden between the rhymes. Meanwhile, the ultras in Parliament push another measure: compensation for émigrés whose lands were seized during the revolution. Billions of francs flow from public coffers into the pockets of aristocrats who already own half the country. In towns and villages, peasants grumble that they're paying twice, once in taxes, once in history. The slogan, "We have paid for our kings too often," appears scrawled on barn doors. Police scrub it away by dawn, but by dusk it's written again. Louis XVIII tries to soften these blows with gestures of goodwill. He pardons a few liberal journalists, commutes some sentences, and even allows talk of minor electoral reforms. But each act of mercy fuels outrage among the ultras. The crown must not compromise with crime, Charles declares. France must be washed clean in faith. He says it with a zeal that frightens even his allies. You can feel him waiting, circling the throne like a hawk around a dying lamb. One afternoon, you pass the Palais Bourbon where the Chamber of Deputies meets. A debate echoes through the halls. Liberals arguing for tolerance, ultras roaring for divine justice. A moderate stands to speak, gray-haired, trembling, and says, "We have survived terror and tyranny alike. Must we now import both into prayer?" He's shouted down. Outside, the crowd chants, "Long live the Duke's soul," but their eyes glitter with something less holy. Paris grows claustrophobic. Censorship returns with
biblical fervor. Booksellers must apply for licenses renewed monthly. Any text without approval is confiscated. Even private letters are inspected. A postal clerk confides to you that they now open envelopes for the security of the realm. You ask whether they read everything. He shrugs. Only what looks interesting. There are flashes of absurdity amid the fear. A playwright is arrested for staging Othello because a censor thinks the line, "Heaven forgive me," mocks confession. Another man spends a week in jail for sneezing during Mass. The priest swears he heard laughter. France, land of philosophers and satire, has become a nation tiptoeing through its own jokes, and yet the repression fails to smother the undercurrent of discontent. Liberal salons go underground, meeting under the guise of literary societies. There, young men in waistcoats debate Rousseau and dream of elections that actually matter. Their leaders, cautious but determined, begin to correspond with sympathetic officers in the army. Many of these officers served under Napoleon's flag. They've kept their eagles hidden, but not forgotten. A new conspiracy takes shape, one that blends Republican ideals with Bonapartist nostalgia, a fusion dangerous enough to scare every monarch in Europe. Historians still debate how close these plots came to succeeding. Some say they were little more than drunken dreams. Others argue that France came within a week of another revolution. What's certain is that the police take them seriously. Spies multiply, prisons fill, and yet every arrest seems to create two more conspirators. You suspect that the Bourbon regime is haunted not just by memory, but by mathematics. Amid all this, Louis XVIII fades like an overexposed photograph. By 1823, he is carried to councils in a chair, his voice barely audible. When he dies in 1824, the nation exhales, but not in grief. For many, it's a sigh of relief, as though the end of his uncertain reign might finally clarify France's direction. Bells ring again, this time not for mourning, but for coronation. Charles X ascends the throne with the confidence of a man who believes God personally arranged it. At his coronation in Reims, he revives rituals unseen since before the Revolution. The sacred oil, the royal touch said to cure scrofula, the choirs chanting Latin hymns older than the cathedral itself. Watching him, you can't help but think of an actor reviving a play whose audience no longer speaks the language. Still, the ceremony dazzles. The golden crown gleams under candlelight, the incense curls upward, and the congregation shouts, "Long live the king!" louder than they feel it. Outside, peasants gape at the splendor, while soldiers keep them behind ropes. You overhear one farmer mutter, "If he can heal the sick, maybe he'll start with France." You try not to laugh aloud. The newspapers praise the new monarch as a pious father. The ultras rejoice. Finally, a king who believes in their creed. But the liberals, the workers, and the weary middle class exchange knowing looks. They've seen this play before. The curtain has just risen on a sequel nobody asked for. As the trumpets fade and the incense drifts out into the gray Paris air, you realize the stage is set once more. The revolutionaries of thought, the priests of certainty, and the ghosts of empire all share the same theater, waiting for the first spark to fall on the velvet drapes. And France, ever combustible, is about to catch fire again. You blink against the glare of gold and incense. It is June 1825, and the Cathedral of Reims smells like sanctity mixed with mothballs. Charles X, newly crowned King of France, stands robed in white silk embroidered with lilies so bright they almost hurt your eyes. Trumpets echo under Gothic arches, bishops chant in Latin, courtiers murmur with the fervor of believers who've forgotten how to doubt. You shift in your seat and realize something. This doesn't feel like a political ceremony. It feels like a resurrection attempt. The coronation revives rituals long buried by revolution. The sacred oil, said to have descended from heaven centuries ago, is brought out of hiding and smeared upon the king's forehead. He's supposed to touch the sick afterward and heal them, the legendary royal touch. You glance at a pale child brought forward by priests, her eyes wide and confused. Charles lays a hand on her head, whispers a blessing, and the crowd gasps as though witnessing a miracle. You're not sure whether she's cured or simply terrified into silence. Outside the cathedral, the world watches on in uneasy awe. France, the nation that once executed kings, now crowns one with divine pomp. To the ultras, this is triumph, the throne and altar reconciled, the revolution finally erased. To everyone else, it's theater, grand and slightly embarrassing. A Paris newspaper dryly notes, His Majesty's miracle healed everything except unemployment. Historians still argue whether Charles X truly believed in divine right or merely performed it for political advantage. But as you watch him raise the crown, his expression leaves little doubt. He believes. This is not Louis XVIII's cautious constitutional monarchy. This is the return of the Crusader spirit, heaven in one hand, law in the other. And France, that restless pupil of modernity, is about to be disciplined again. After the coronation, Charles begins his reign with symbolic gestures that speak louder than decrees. He orders religious processions through Paris, bans Sunday labor, and funds the rebuilding of churches destroyed during the Revolution. Bishops return to influence, their robes sweeping through ministries like holy dusters. A law restores censorship in defense of public morals, though everyone knows what morals they mean. Then comes the law of indemnity. You can almost hear the coins clinking as it passes through Parliament. A colossal sum, nearly 1 billion francs, paid to aristocrats whose lands were seized during the Revolution. It's presented as justice, but to peasants and merchants who must fund it through taxes, it feels like robbery disguised as repentance. "We buy our own chains," mutters a farmer as he signs yet another ledger. The contrast between city and court grows grotesque. In Paris, the streets teem with beggars. In Versailles, chandeliers blaze above banquets where the king toasts, "The peace of God upon my realm." You wonder if he notices that the peace is mostly outside his walls, sharpening its knives. In the Chamber of Deputies, liberal voices protest, invoking the Charter of 1814 and its promise of rights. Charles listens politely, then smiles the way a priest might at an especially naive sinner. "I know the Charter better than those who quote it," he says. Its first article is respect for the crown. The ultras applaud. The liberals exchange weary glances. France, they realize, is sliding backward by decree. One quirky story circulates in cafes. A court official proposes awarding medals for piety and loyalty. The design shows a kneeling peasant kissing a royal hand. Within days, caricatures flood Paris. Peasants kissing boots, dogs kissing hands, even statues of Napoleon bowing mockingly. Police confiscate the prints, but not before they're pasted to every lamppost. Meanwhile, the clergy tightens its grip on education. Schools are handed to religious orders. Textbooks replace patriotic tales with biblical parables. Faith, obedience, humility, the children chant in unison. You visit a classroom where a young girl raises her hand timidly and asks, "Who was Robespierre?" The teacher freezes, then whispers, "A name best forgotten, my dear." You leave the room thinking that forgetting has become France's most dangerous habit. Historians still debate whether Charles's policies were sincere or suicidal. Some describe him as a well-meaning relic, others as a fanatic who mistook nostalgia for governance. What's certain is that he governs like a man chasing ghosts. To him, the revolution is not an event, but an infection, and the cure is purification of laws, of morals, of memory. In 1825, he signs the Law of Sacrilege, decreeing death for anyone who desecrates holy objects. The chamber erupts in debate. One deputy mocks the measure. "Are we to hang men for stealing candles?" The ultras hiss. The law passes anyway, though it's rarely enforced. France laughs nervously. The gallows creak in principle, not in practice, but principle
is enough to chill the air. Yet even as Charles re-Christianizes France, his kingdom modernizes beneath him. Steam engines whistle, factories hum, rail projects begin. The bourgeoisie, the new middle class of bankers, lawyers, and merchants, thrives under economic growth, but seethes under political exclusion. They pay taxes, they run businesses, but fewer than 100,000 of them can vote. "We make the nation," one banker mutters, "and the nobles make the laws." You can feel the storm clouds forming above the counting houses. A peculiar dinner anecdote makes the rounds among merchants. A baron at table declares, "Commerce must serve faith." A merchant replies, "Faith doesn't pay my creditors." Laughter ripples until the host glares. The incident seems trivial, but it marks the widening rift between a society of belief and one of balance sheets. The king's foreign adventures do little to ease tension. In 1827, French troops invade Algiers under the pretext of punishing a local ruler. The victory dazzles national pride, but also exposes hypocrisy. A monarch who preaches humility now builds an empire. The newspapers, heavily censored, print glowing reports. Still, veterans of Napoleon's campaigns snort into their wine. "He conquers a market," says one, "not a continent." At home, dissent ferments again. The liberal press, though gagged, finds loopholes. Writers use allegory, describing a shepherd who mistakes wolves for lambs, or a gardener who waters weeds. Everyone knows who the shepherd and gardener are. Satirical journals sketch Charles as a blindfolded saint carrying a candle that drips wax on his own robe. The police seize issues by the hundreds, but readers queue for the next one anyway. The army, once loyal, begins to stir. Younger officers, raised on tales of Austerlitz, grumble at being commanded by men who earned their ranks through ancestry rather than ability. Bonapartist nostalgia flickers again in barracks songs and toasts. "If we must kneel," says a captain in private, "at least let it be before victory." The church, intoxicated by newfound authority, overreaches. Priests begin preaching against modern sin, theater, novels, even dancing. In Brittany, a bishop condemns the waltz as a gateway to moral decay. Within a week, Paris ballrooms are packed, dancers spinning faster out of spite. Repression here doesn't silence, it choreographs rebellion. Still, for all the grumbling, France remains eerily quiet on the surface. The economy grows, and Charles mistakes prosperity for loyalty. He builds monuments, grants titles, and orders his portrait hung in every town hall. The peasants nod politely. The bourgeoisie invests discreetly in printing presses. Every smile conceals impatience. Every sermon conceals satire. Historians still argue whether the king ever sensed the danger. Perhaps he believed that divine right made him untouchable. Perhaps he thought France had grown too civilized to revolt again. You can almost pity him, an old man dreaming in Latin, while the world speaks industry and irony. One spring evening in 1829, you walk along the Seine and overhear two students debating outside a cafe. "Do you think France will rise again?" asks one. The other laughs softly. "France never sleeps long." Their laughter fades into the hum of the city, that restless pulse beneath royal prayers. By the time Charles appoints his ultra-royalist minister, Prince de Polignac, the next act of the drama is inevitable. You can feel it in every cobblestone, every muttered toast, every clandestine press sheet fluttering from a window at midnight. The lilies on the banners look fresh, but the stems are already brittle. And as you leave the glowing boulevards for the dark alleys beyond, you sense it, a whisper returning. The same that haunted the monarchy a generation earlier. The word is dangerous, ancient, electric. It's revolution. You can almost hear it before you see it. The low growl of a printing press churning out forbidden words. Paris, 1830. The city's lungs fill with the smell of ink and smoke, with murmurs of defiance spreading through its crooked arteries. Every corner cafe has become a newsroom, every wine shop a parliament. And though the streets look calm under their summer sun, you can feel the air quivering like a held breath. France is about to erupt again.
King Charles X begins the year convinced that his subjects are obedient, that his throne rests on faith and family. He rides through Paris in carriages drawn by white horses, the royal guards glittering like angels in metal helmets. Crowds gather, bowing politely, but their cheers sound rehearsed. Behind the smiles, resentment hardens. You hear it in the baker's mutter about taxes, in the printer's whisper about censorship, in the banker's sigh about a government that borrows but never listens. Inside the palace, the king's ministers, especially the devout and stubborn Prince de Polignac, feed him a steady diet of delusion. France loves you, sire, they insist. Only a few malcontents grumble. You picture them handing him reports scrubbed clean of truth, as if lying were an act of devotion. Charles believes them because he wants to. He tells his advisors, "My people are like my children." And like most fathers who say that, he's about to be surprised by how fast the children have grown up. The Chamber of Deputies, elected mostly by property owners, grows restless. Even men who once supported the crown, bourgeois conservatives, lawyers, landowners, are losing patience. They want reform, freer press, broader suffrage, fewer clerical privileges. They don't want another revolution, but the king doesn't hear nuance. To him, disagreement smells like blasphemy. Historians still argue whether Charles's downfall was inevitable or self-inflicted. The clues are all there. In March, a deputy named Benjamin Constant warns that a government which denies liberty invites its own executioner. The king scoffs. In July, he decides to test just how much liberty his people will tolerate, and the answer arrives sooner than he expects. On July 25, 1830, 4 royal ordinances appear in the Moniteur, France's official gazette. Their tone is calm, almost bureaucratic, dangerous in its understatement. The first dissolves the newly elected chamber before it even convenes. The second restricts voting rights further, effectively silencing the middle class. The third tightens press laws to near total censorship. The fourth calls for new elections under these conditions. In one stroke of ink, the king tries to rewind history back to 1788. He imagines applause from loyalists. What he gets is the sound of metal type being locked into frames. Parisian printers, furious at the gag, go to work before dawn. By noon, handbills spread across the city. The king has broken the charter. You walk those streets as the news ripples outward. Students shout it from balconies. Merchants mutter it behind counters. Workers who barely know the details grasp the essence. The crown has overstepped. "He wants to silence us again," says one cobbler. "Then we'll answer with noise." The first resistance is symbolic. Journalists from liberal papers meet secretly and draft a declaration signed by 44 editors. It begins, "The legal regime is over. That of force begins." Their presses are sealed by police, so they move operations into attics, printing with hand-cranked machines that sound like ticking clocks counting down to revolution. The next morning, the ticking stops. The guns begin. Crowds gather in the Place du Palais Royal, chanting for liberty and bread. Police try to disperse them with sabers, but the crowd grows. Students throw stones. Soldiers fire into the air. Then someone fires back. You duck behind a fountain as bullets whistle. Within hours, barricades rise from nowhere. Furniture, paving stones, carts overturned in a heartbeat. Paris remembers how to fight. It never really forgot. By nightfall, the tricolor flag, banned for 15 years, flutters again over the Hôtel de Ville. Its colors glow faintly in the torchlight, defiant and almost holy. You hear the old revolutionary cry return, fierce and familiar. "À bas les Bourbons." Historians still argue whether this uprising was spontaneous or orchestrated. It hardly matters now. The July Revolution moves with its own rhythm.
a heartbeat pounding through every alley. On the second day, July 28th, the army floods the city. Barricades multiply. Women pass ammunition in baskets disguised as laundry. Boys climb rooftops to throw tiles at soldiers. Priests bless the wounded on both sides. The smell of gunpowder and sweat mingles with that of bread baking in ovens that will feed the fighters.
You find yourself near the Louvre, where musket fire echoes against marble. A young worker beside you, barely 20, face streaked with soot, grins and says, "My father fought for Napoleon. Now I fight for France." He reloads calmly, as if continuing a family trade. Around him, artisans, clerks, and veterans shout orders with military precision. The revolution has no leader, yet it moves like an organism with a single mind. On July 29th, the decisive day, the royal troops begin to falter. Many refuse to fire. "We will not shoot our brothers," a sergeant declares, laying down his musket. Some units even join the insurgents. When the Louvre finally falls, the crowd surges inside, tearing down Bourbon symbols and replacing them with tricolors. The Tuileries Palace follows. Paris belongs to the people again. Charles X, meanwhile, sits in St. Cloud, convinced the revolt will fade. "They are children," he tells his generals. "They will tire by morning." By morning, the monarchy is gone. He flees toward the coast, his carriage rattling past fields of wheat that wave indifferently. You imagine the irony. The man who tried to resurrect divine right now sneaks away under escort, leaving behind the sound of liberty's bells ringing through his capital. A quirky little episode from that day. A group of students finds the royal throne abandoned in the Tuileries. They drag it into the street, set it upright, and take turns sitting on it, bowing theatrically to each other. Then someone lights it on fire. The flames rise against the dawn sky, and the crowd cheers, not in hatred, but in exhilaration. A nation that has burned so many thrones hardly finds it shocking anymore. By July 30th, the tricolor flies from every rooftop. Barricades transform into victory monuments draped with flowers. The fighting stops almost as suddenly as it began. 3 days, les trois glorieuses, the 3 glorious days, have remade France. But revolutions, like hangovers, always leave a reckoning. The victors must now decide what freedom means. Republicans demand a new republic. Bonapartists dream of another emperor. Moderates, weary of chaos, call for a constitutional monarch. "We need a king who knows when to shut up," one merchant says dryly. The Chamber of Deputies convenes under the roar of cannon salutes. Some propose crowning the young Duke of Orleans, Louis Philippe, as King of the French. It's a careful phrase, not King of France. The title suggests sovereignty from the people, not over them. For a moment, you sense history trying to compromise with itself. Louis Philippe accepts, stepping onto the balcony of the Palais Bourbon with tricolor sash and a nervous smile. The crowd cheers, not wildly, but hopefully. He bows and promises, "I will remain faithful to the charter and to the liberties it guarantees." You can't help noticing how practiced the line sounds, like a politician rehearsing a lullaby. Historians still debate whether this was revolution or rebranding. The monarchy survives, trimmed and reupholstered, but the spell of divine right shatters for good. The new regime is called the July Monarchy, a name that already sounds like a season, destined to change. You walk the city that evening. The barricades have become bonfires. Workers dance, soldiers smoke beside them. Students quote poetry to anyone who'll listen. The smell of victory, gunpowder, sweat, cheap wine hangs thick in the air. Somewhere in the distance, church bells and factory whistles ring together in accidental harmony. Above it all, the tricolor waves from Notre Dame's towers, fluttering in the warm breeze. You look up and realize the revolution never truly died. It just went quiet for a while, waiting for the next chorus. And tonight, it sings again. Paris wakes to the echo of musket fire fading into memory. The smoke drifts upward, gray against a washed-out dawn, and beneath it lies a city rearranged, streets littered with broken glass and fallen shutters, yet humming with something like pride. The 3 glorious days are over. Barricades turn into benches. Flags stitched overnight now hang from every window, a patchwork of defiance fluttering in the wind. You walk through the chaos and realize France has just reinvented itself. Again, the Bourbon lilies have vanished as if they never existed. The white flag is gone, replaced by the tricolor, blue for freedom, white for unity, red for the blood of those who insisted both mattered. You spot a street vendor hawking ribbons in those colors, shouting, "Vive la Charte! Vive la Liberté!" His voice cracks with exhaustion, but he sells out within minutes. Liberty, it seems, always finds good business in Paris. Louis-Philippe d'Orléans, the new King of the French, enters the capital not on horseback like a conqueror, but on foot, holding his hat low and wearing a modest black coat. His arrival is carefully choreographed, approachable, bourgeois, unthreatening. He pauses before the Hôtel de Ville, bows to the crowd, and calls himself a citizen among citizens. The cheer that follows sounds less like worship and more like relief. After decades of absolutists and emperors, the French have found a king who pretends to be one of them. Historians still debate whether Louis-Philippe's humility was sincere or simply smart marketing. Either way, it works. The tricolor he lifts that day is not just a flag, it's an endorsement deal. The bourgeoisie, newly empowered by revolution but terrified of anarchy, embrace him as a compromise between freedom and fear. Better a banker on the throne, one shopkeeper jokes, than a priest or a corpse. You follow the procession through cheering crowds to the Palais Bourbon, where deputies confirm his title, not King of France, but King of the French. It's a subtle, seismic shift. Sovereignty now flows upward from the people, or so the Constitution claims. In reality, only 1% of them can vote, but no one wants to spoil the mood with arithmetic. The July monarchy begins not with drums, but with paperwork. Louis-Philippe quickly brands himself as the Citizen King. He replaces powdered wigs with sideburns, rides in public carriages, and sends his sons to Parisian schools instead of palaces. He even carries an umbrella, a symbol of bourgeois respectability that delights cartoonists. He reigns under the weather, one quips. The image sticks. Yet beneath this charming moderation lies calculation. The new government keeps the structures of monarchy, but paints them in liberal colors. Censorship loosens, but only for loyal newspapers. The press celebrates freedom, but journalists still receive visits from the police at inconvenient hours. The Charter of 1830 guarantees civil rights, but voting remains restricted to the wealthy. "We have traded the divine right of kings," murmurs a cynic in a cafe, "for the divine right of bankers." You sip your coffee and glance around the room. It's full of optimism, tempered with irony, the favorite drink of Paris. Artists sketch scenes from the barricades. Poets compare liberty to a goddess in blue skirts. Delacroix paints liberty leading the people, her bare breast defying both prudery and oppression. The censors hesitate, unsure whether it's politics or anatomy they should fear. The painting becomes the unofficial altar of the revolution. Outside, the working class celebrates, believing this new order will finally recognize them. But within months, disillusionment creeps in. Wages stagnate, food prices rise. The same men who fought on the barricades now struggle to find work. "We made the king," grumbles one mason, but he forgot to make jobs. In cafes, artisans whisper that they've been replaced by merchants in silk hats. The revolution, once theirs, has been franchised. Louis-Philippe, meanwhile, works tirelessly to stabilize his throne. He grants amnesty to former Bonapartists, restores the tricolor officially, and promotes industrial modernization. Railways expand, factories roar to life. Paris becomes Europe's workshop. The smell of oil and ambition replaces that of gunpowder. But progress has a price: child labor, overcrowded tenements,
air so thick with coal dust it stains your collar before lunch. You visit one of these factories in Saint-Denis. Inside, hundreds of workers toil in the dim light, their faces pale and resolute. A boy no older than 10 feeds cloth into a mechanical loom. "My father died on the barricades," he says matter-of-factly, "so I work now." You nod, realizing that revolutions often trade one kind of servitude for another. Still, the regime knows how to flatter the public. Louis-Philippe commissions museums and monuments dedicated to national reconciliation. At Versailles, he transforms the royal palace, once a symbol of tyranny, into a museum of French history. Portraits of kings share walls with paintings of revolutionaries. Even Napoleon earns a gallery, his image reframed as patriotic rather than dangerous. It's a brilliant act of political judo, turning past rebellion into decoration. The king also authorizes something extraordinary. In 1840, at the urging of public nostalgia, he brings Napoleon's ashes home from St. Helena. The ceremony unfolds with near religious solemnity. The coffin, draped in the tricolor, sails up the Seine under a gray December sky. Crowds line the banks in silence, hats off, tears running down faces that barely remember the man himself. You stand among them, watching the procession pass and realize that Louis-Philippe has performed the ultimate balancing act. He's made Napoleon's ghost his ally. Historians still argue whether this return of the ashes was brilliant or desperate. It works for a while. National pride surges. Veterans weep. Newspapers print verses about reconciliation. "The past is forgiven," declares one headline. But history, you've learned, never forgives forgetfulness. By the late 1830s, cracks show in the Citizen King's facade. Corruption scandals spread like wine stains across the government. Deputies enrich themselves with railway stocks and colonial contracts. A satirical journal publishes a cartoon showing the king as a pear, a soft, swollen shape with a sly smile. The censors ban it. Printers make 1,000 copies anyway. Soon, every Paris wall blooms with pears, each one slightly ruder than the last. Louis-Philippe laughs it off in public but fumes in private. His vanity, once hidden behind charm, begins to show. He tightens press laws again, deploys police spies in cafes, and forbids political gatherings under the pretense of public order. It's the same old melody played on new instruments. One evening, you walk through the Palais Royal gardens. Gas lamps flicker, throwing light over shop fronts filled with clocks, jewelry, and political pamphlets. Two old men argue by the fountain. One praises the king's prudence, the other curses his greed. You realize that both are right. The July monarchy is a paradox, peaceful but unequal, stable but hollow. It gives France prosperity without justice, liberty without voice. The people grow restless again. The poor feel betrayed. The middle class feels taxed. The radicals feel ignored. Even the bourgeoisie who cheered in 1830 begin to grumble about moral fatigue. Newspapers write cautiously about social questions, a polite term for hunger. Paris seems calm, but its cobblestones remember how to move. Historians still argue when the revolution began to stir again. Some trace it to the economic crisis of 1846. Others say it started the moment Louis-Philippe forgot who put him on the throne. You sense it sooner, in the silence between street songs, in the way soldiers glance nervously at crowds, in how the king's portraits begin to gather dust. One winter night, as snow falls over the Seine, you pause at a cafe window. Inside, a group of workers huddle around a newspaper. One points to an article about political reform and says quietly, "They'll never give it. We'll have to take it." The others nod. Outside, the river glides dark and steady toward the sea, carrying reflections of tricolors still glowing faintly in the lamplight. You smile faintly. France has changed kings, flags, and constitutions, but not its appetite for unfinished sentences. Each generation picks up where the last one trailed off. And somewhere, beneath all the smoke and ambition, that same heartbeat continues. Impatient, defiant, unstoppable. The tricolor still waves above Paris, but the wind that lifts it has changed. It no longer smells of victory or patriotism. It smells of smoke, sweat, and cheap coal. The year is 1840-something, and you walk through a city that hums like a machine trying to remember it has a soul. The streets are cleaner, wider, busier, but beneath their order you sense disquiet. France under Louis Philippe is prosperous, yes, but it's a prosperity that tastes uneven, like bread sliced unevenly at a long table. The citizen king has kept his promise of peace. No wars, no executions, no emperors returning from exile. But peace is a curious beast. It fattens some and starves others. The Industrial Revolution transforms Paris into a forest of chimneys, each one puffing gray prayers to progress. Along the Seine, iron bridges rise where wooden ones once stood, and locomotives rattle the suburbs awake. To the bourgeoisie, it's the music of modernity. To the workers, it's a lullaby sung by machines that never sleep.
You visit a textile mill in Rouen. The clatter of looms is deafening, relentless. Men, women, even children move in perfect rhythm with the iron arms of the machines. A foreman tells you proudly, "We produce more cloth in a day than in all of Louis XIV's reign." Then, softer, they just wear out faster too. Outside, a boy with a bandaged hand sells bread to the same workers who made the linen it's wrapped in. Progress has a cruel sense of humor. Historians still argue whether the July monarchy was a golden age or a gilded cage. By every chart and measure, France is thriving. Railways stretch across the country, banks multiply, literacy climbs, the arts flourish. Yet somehow, you can't shake the feeling that all this light casts longer shadows. Poverty doesn't vanish, it relocates to the edges of cities, to damp cellars, to the backs of tenement courtyards where you hear coughing behind every thin wall. In cafes, journalists debate the social question. It's the polite way of asking, why are so many still poor when the factories shine so bright? The government responds with statistics and shrugs. They drink, says one minister. They're uneducated, says another. A radical newspaper counters, they're exhausted. You sip your coffee and think exhaustion looks a lot like patience running out. One evening, you stroll past the Palais Royal. Street lamps throw yellow halos onto a world of contradictions. Opera-goers in silk, beggars wrapped in rags, students reciting poetry beside bankers calculating interest. A man selling newspapers mutters, "It's the age of comfort, but not of kindness." He hands you a fresh issue, its headline careful but daring. Can the people still believe in the citizen king? Louis Philippe believes they can, as long as they have enough bread and banquets. He hosts grand exhibitions of industry, awards medals to inventors, and poses as the patron saint of progress. The crowds cheer, but their applause sounds hollow, like clapping after a sermon you didn't believe. He reigns by respectability, one pamphlet says, and will fall by boredom. You laugh, but quietly. It's too accurate to be funny. The king's image, once genial, now hardens. His umbrella becomes a symbol of smugness. Caricatures multiply, showing him bloated, pear-shaped, juggling bags of money. The people's king, the captions sneer, who eats for two? The press laws tighten again. Editors are fined, imprisoned, silenced. The joke becomes prophecy. The freer the factory, the quieter the newspaper. Meanwhile, the opposition diversifies. Liberals demand expanded suffrage. Republicans demand an end to monarchy altogether. Socialists, new voices with new vocabularies, begin to imagine equality beyond mere voting rights. One of them, a wiry philosopher named Proudhon, declares property is theft. The bourgeoisie gasp, clutching their ledgers, but the workers nod. They've felt that truth in their hands for years. You attend a meeting of reformists disguised as a banquet of civic fraternity. These political banquets have become the latest loophole, public dinners masquerading as private feasts.
where speeches slip between toasts. Tonight's menu features soup, roast chicken, and subversion. A young lawyer named Alphonse de Lamartine rises with a glass of wine and says softly, "Reform is like bread. It must reach every table." The applause lasts long after the dessert. The next morning, the police ban future banquets. Historians still argue whether Louis-Philippe understood how fragile his balance had become. He ruled through calculation, believing that moderation could outwit passion. But moderation, in the long run, satisfies no one. The radicals see cowardice. The royalists see betrayal. The very middle class that once adored him now feels fenced out of power. "He promised us liberty," says a merchant in Lyon, "but gave us profit margins instead." Across France, crop failures add fuel to frustration. Bread prices soar. Unemployment rises. Soup kitchens appear beside shuttered factories. You wander through a Paris winter fog thick with chimney soot and discontent. In one alley, you overhear two women arguing over a loaf of bread, while a man nearby reads aloud from a pamphlet. Suffrage is the hunger of the spirit. It's both poetry and prophecy. At the same time, the salons of the wealthy buzz with fear. "The rabble grows restless," murmurs a duchess, sipping champagne. Revolution is such an uncivilized word. Her companion, a banker, nods gravely. "Yes, but markets hate uncertainty." He says it like a prayer, as though stability were a sacrament. You resist the urge to tell them that revolutions don't start in salons. They start when people who make bread can no longer afford it. You stroll through the Latin Quarter, where students debate freedom in smoky cafes. They quote Rousseau, discuss democracy, and draw sketches of barricades in their notebooks as if rehearsing for an exam. A young man named Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, nephew of the Napoleon, circulates among them, quiet but magnetic. Some laugh at him, calling him the Emperor of Cafe Tables. Others whisper that destiny sometimes skips a generation. You file the name away, sensing you'll hear it again. In 1847, France celebrates the 18th anniversary of the July Revolution with polite fireworks and impolite irony. Veterans of 1830, now middle-aged and gray, march beside younger men who mutter, "Our fathers fought for freedom. We fight for a seat at the table." Louis-Philippe watches from a balcony, applauding, unaware that the applause below is for the idea of revolution, not for him. That same year, scandal strikes the royal household. Ministers are caught selling honors for profit. Deputies trade favors like stocks. The phrase gouvernement de corruption, government of corruption, appears in print and refuses to disappear. Even loyal newspapers start to hedge their praise. "The king is honest," one editorial sighs, but honesty surrounded by thieves is loneliness, not virtue. One rainy evening, you pass through the Place de la Concorde. The obelisk stands where the guillotine once stood, pointing toward gray clouds. You can almost hear the ghosts murmuring, "We've seen this before." The square's name, Concorde, feels ironic again. Peace in name, tension in air. Somewhere, a carriage wheel splashes through a puddle shaped like a crown. Historians still argue whether the regime could have been saved with reforms. Wider suffrage, lower taxes, more humility. Perhaps it could, but Louis-Philippe prefers calculation to courage. When the opposition demands change, he says, "France is free enough." When radicals protest in the streets, he calls them ingrates who bite the hand of prosperity. You know that tone. Every ruler who speaks it ends the same way, surprised that the hand comes back empty. Winter deepens. Food prices climb higher. The political banquets, once festive, turn openly defiant. In February 1848, the government bans one too many. The crowd that gathers to protest isn't large at first. Students, workers, curious onlookers. But by dusk, it swells. Barricades rise again. as if summoned from the cobblestones by memory itself. You hear a familiar rhythm, hammer on stone, shouts echoing through alleys, the sound of history clearing its throat.
Louis-Philippe looks out the palace window, umbrella still beside him, and sighs. They will disperse. But this time, the people don't. They've dispersed too often already. The smoke outside glows orange. The city trembles with an old, irresistible heartbeat. You exhale into the cold night air and think, it's happening again. Because in France, it always does. The stage is set, the chorus assembled, the curtain already half raised. And somewhere out there, another Bonaparte waits in the wings. The morning of February 22nd, 1848 feels deceptively ordinary. Paris wakes to drizzle, carriage wheels grinding against wet cobblestones, bakers lighting ovens, and students late for lectures. But if you listen carefully, beneath the clatter of hooves and the hiss of rain, you hear something sharper. A metallic tension, a hum of defiance too steady to be chance. The air feels rehearsed, as though the city already knows its lines. The government has just banned another banquet for reform, the latest in a series of peaceful dinners turned political rallies. The people of Paris, who have learned to measure dignity by defiance, decide to hold the banquet anyway. They march instead of dine. You follow them down the Boulevard des Capucines, students waving tricolors, workers singing old revolutionary songs, women tossing violets from balconies. The police watch, uneasy, knowing how quickly music can turn to muskets in this city. At first, it's almost festive. Marchers chant, "Vive la Réforme!" and "Down with the ministers!" But when cavalry appear at the end of the street, sabers drawn, the mood hardens. The protesters slow, then surge forward. Someone throws a rock. Someone fires a pistol. Horses rear, men shout, women scream. By nightfall, the first barricade is up, and the banquet protest has become the revolution of 1848. Louis-Philippe sits in the Tuileries, reading reports by candlelight. He frowns, unconcerned. "They'll tire," he mutters. He said that before, but this time, Paris doesn't tire. Paris remembers. The cobblestones remember. Even the walls remember the rhythm of revolt. By February 23rd, the unrest spreads. Crowds chant, "Vive la République!" words not heard since 1815. Columns of smoke rise over working-class districts where factories have shuttered, throwing thousands into unemployment. The National Guard, a citizen militia meant to defend the regime, hesitates. Many of its members, shopkeepers, small craftsmen, sympathize with the protesters. When ordered to fire, some instead lower their muskets. "We are not the king's dogs," one captain declares. Historians still argue about the spark that ignited the real fury. Most point to that night, February 23rd, when troops guarding the foreign ministry fire into a crowd. Dozens fall. Their blood seeps into the gutters, mixing with rainwater and ink from smashed printing presses. The next morning, the dead are paraded through the streets on wooden carts, candles burning beside them. The chant changes. "Down with Guizot, down with the king." You trail the procession as it winds through Paris. The faces you pass are solemn, exhausted, resolved. They don't shout now, they march. The tricolor flaps wetly in the wind. An old veteran of 1830 salutes the bodies and murmurs, "We did this once for liberty. Let it not be for bread this time." You wish he were right. Louis-Philippe finally realizes the danger. He dismisses his unpopular minister Guizot and offers reform. But the gesture arrives too late, too thin, too familiar. The people don't want reforms anymore. They want reckoning. That evening, mobs storm the Hôtel de Ville. Government offices are ransacked. Royal portraits hurled into the Seine. The cry spreads like wildfire. To the barricades! You find yourself near the Place du Carrousel as midnight approaches. Bonfires flicker along the avenues. Barricades bloom like weeds. Wagons overturned, paving stones piled high, trees felled across intersections. Students hammer nails into doors for shields. Workers melt pewter into bullets. The air thrums with the rhythm of hammers on stone. Someone paints in red across a wall. Liberté ou la mort. Liberty or death. The paint drips, looking disturbingly like blood. By dawn, the royal palace stands nearly encircled. Inside, Louis-Philippe looks every bit his 74 years. His advisors plead for a crackdown, but the army wavers. The guard refuses orders, and crowds are pouring in from every direction. Perhaps, he says quietly, it is time for France to have her way once more. He signs an abdication, naming his grandson as heir, and orders a carriage. A quirky detail. He leaves the Tuileries disguised as an ordinary man, umbrella in hand, escorted by only a few loyal guards. Someone later swears that as he passed a crowd on the Rue de Rivoli, an old woman spat and shouted, "Keep your umbrella, bourgeois king." It becomes the last joke of his reign. He flees toward England, the same route Charles X took 18 years earlier. History, you realize, has an impeccable sense of symmetry. The citizen king who began as king of the French now ends as ex-king of the Parisians. Back in Paris, the palace falls without a fight. Crowds surge through the gates, past marble staircases and gilded salons. You follow them, boots crunching on shattered glass. In the throne room, a young student climbs onto the royal chair, raises a tricolor and shouts, "Long live the Republic!" The crowd answers with a roar that shakes the chandeliers. For the first time since Napoleon, the word republic rings without irony. Historians still debate the speed of that transformation. In 48 hours, monarchy collapses. In another 48, a provisional government is declared. France doesn't merely depose a king, it redefines itself again. On February 26th, the Second Republic is proclaimed from the Hôtel de Ville, beneath a sky still gray with gunpowder. "Citizens," the new ministers announce, "from this day forth, France belongs to the French." You've heard that phrase before, but now it feels less like poetry and more like exhaustion turned into law. The mood is jubilant but nervous. Everyone fears that victory might devour itself, as revolutions so often do. Workers demand the right to work, forming national workshops to guarantee employment. Middle-class reformers preach moderation. Radicals call for equality. The same tricolor waves above them all, but each faction imagines a different shade of blue. You walk through the streets that week and feel time folding on itself. The ghosts of 1789 and 1830 are everywhere, on every wall, in every song. People greet each other with the old revolutionary salute, "Citizen," half serious, half playful. Posters announce new elections, universal male suffrage for the first time in French history. In cafes, men toast to the dawn of the people. In back alleys, others whisper that dawns can also burn. A peculiar moment. On the steps of Notre Dame, a group of priests blesses the Republic while the crowd sings La Marseillaise. Incense mixes with gunpowder smoke. Church bells and revolutionary drums compete for rhythm. It feels like reconciliation, fragile and fleeting. But beneath the jubilation, tension stirs. The workers who carried the barricades expect not only liberty, but bread. The bourgeois liberals who run the government fear socialism more than monarchy. "The Republic must feed the people," declares a pamphlet. "Yes," replies another, "but not eat itself." For now, though, Paris celebrates. The monarchy's statues are toppled, replaced by flags. Children play with fragments of the king's bust as if they were marbles. Musicians perform in the streets, turning marches into dances. Even cynics smile. You catch yourself smiling too, knowing full well how short-lived revolutions often are, but unable to resist the hope that maybe, just maybe, this one
will hold. By March, the news spreads across Europe like fire through dry fields. Vienna, Berlin, Milan, cities erupt in imitation. The springtime of peoples, newspapers call it. The French Republic becomes a contagion of courage. Kings tremble, students cheer, and one British observer writes, "When Paris sneezes, Europe catches fever." You chuckle, remembering that France has always preferred contagion to compromise. Still, not all rejoice. Former royalists whisper that chaos will follow, and some merchants lock their shops, fearing looters. Yet when you walk by the Seine one golden evening, you see couples strolling arm in arm, soldiers chatting with civilians, flags fluttering like laundry in a gentler wind. For a heartbeat, it feels like France has found balance, a republic both proud and peaceful. Historians still argue how long that heartbeat lasted. Some say weeks, others months. You suspect it began fading the very moment the ink dried on the proclamation. Freedom, after all, is heavier to hold than chains are to break. For now, though, the streets of Paris glow with twilight and optimism. The cafes hum with laughter, the tricolor dances above the bridges, and for one rare instant, you sense the impossible. A France that believes its own reflection. You lean against a railing by the river and whisper, "She's done it again." And the Seine, dark and calm, seems to murmur back, "For now." The tricolor flaps lazily over the Hôtel de Ville as a pale sun creeps over Paris. The barricades are gone now, dismantled plank by plank, and in their place stand posters bearing the words République Française, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. The ink is still wet. The cobblestones still smell faintly of smoke. You breathe it in, the scent of victory, always half mixed with exhaustion. The Second Republic has been born, not with a coronation, but with a sigh. France has overthrown her kings yet again, and now she must decide what to do with freedom once she has it. The provisional government, a collage of moderates, socialists, and dreamers, meets in the Hôtel de Ville's gilded chambers. Outside, the crowds cheer. Inside, the arguments begin. Everyone agrees that liberty must be defended. No one agrees on what it means. You slip into one of those crowded sessions. Around the long table sit men whose names will soon fill history books. Lamartine, the poet-politician, Ledru Rollin, the fiery Republican, Louis Blanc, the idealist with spectacles thick as conviction. They debate everything from universal suffrage to the national workshops for the unemployed. The poet declares, "The Republic will be generous, or it will not be." The financier beside him mutters, "Generosity is expensive." The clerk recording minutes looks up once and whispers, "This is going to end badly." You think he might be right. Historians still argue whether the Second Republic was doomed from birth or strangled in its cradle. Its first act, granting the vote to every adult male, is the boldest in French history. 9 million men suddenly have a voice. The streets fill with posters urging citizens to vote as free men, not as factions. In cafes, men line up to dip pens in communal ink pots, signing their names to petitions and promises. Women watch from windows, proud but excluded. Suffrage remains stubbornly masculine. "Next time," says one washerwoman, wringing her hands in soapy water, "they'll remember us." The elections of April 1848 bring euphoria. Peasants who've never left their villages travel miles to cast ballots. Old soldiers pin faded medals to their coats. Even priests bless the voters as they pass. France hums with civic pride. But when the results arrive, jubilation gives way to surprise. The countryside, still devout and cautious, chooses conservatives over radicals. The revolutionary poets of Paris suddenly realize that most of France doesn't speak in verses. The new assembly meets in May. It is large, loud, and instantly divided. On one side, the moderate Republicans preaching order. On the other, socialists demanding justice. In between sit men who'd rather take a nap than a stand. The poor grow impatient. The national workshops, meant to provide jobs for the unemployed, are overwhelmed. Hundreds of thousands apply, many just seeking bread. The treasury groans. "We have built a promise too large to feed," one minister sighs. By June, patience snaps. The government votes to close the workshops. For the working poor, it's betrayal. For the bourgeoisie, relief. Barricades rise again across Paris, this time not against kings, but against fellow Republicans. The June Days, they call it later, 3 nights of brutal street fighting between workers and the National Guard. You hear cannon fire echo across the Seine, smell the acrid fog of gunpowder and grief. When it's over, thousands lie dead or imprisoned. The Republic survives, but its innocence does not. Historians still debate those June days. Were they a defense of liberty or a civil war in miniature? You walk the deserted streets afterward. Bullet holes pock the walls. Torn tricolors hang limp from windows. A child plays with a spent musket cartridge as if it were a marble. "Who won?" he asks. You don't answer. The government, terrified by its own victory, swings rightward. Socialist leaders are jailed. Radical newspapers shut down. France grows quiet again. But it's the kind of quiet that follows shouting, not peace. And in that hush, a familiar name begins to circulate once more. Bonaparte. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, nephew of the great emperor, has been hovering on Europe's margins. An exile, a dreamer, a man who once tried to stage a coup with a circus troupe. Yes, really. Now, he returns, polished and patient. To some, he's a joke. To others, a symbol of stability. He promises order without tyranny, glory without war, compassion without chaos. "I am my uncle's heir," he says, "but also the son of the Republic." It's the perfect slogan for a weary nation. The presidential election of December 1848 becomes a fever. Posters of Bonaparte's melancholy face cover every wall, his name whispered like a prayer and a gamble. The peasants remember the emperor as the man who gave them land. Veterans remember him as the man who gave them pride. The bourgeoisie sees a Bonaparte as insurance against socialism. The poor see him as hope in a gray coat. You watch as ballots drop into boxes like falling leaves. When the results are read, the outcome stuns even him. Louis Napoleon wins by a landslide, more than 5 million votes. The Republic has elected a Bonaparte. You can almost hear history chuckling. Again, the new president enters Paris in calm triumph. No cannons, no processions, just the quiet thunder of inevitability. He swears to uphold the Constitution, and then begins dismantling it with disarming politeness. He cultivates everyone, workers with charity, clerics with faith, army officers with promises of glory. The assembly underestimates him, the press mocks him, and the people adore him. You attend one of his speeches at the Conservatory of Arts and Trades. His voice is soft, uncertain at first, but his words are simple, dangerously simple. "France is tired," he says. "She needs rest, work, and honor." The crowd murmurs assent. He ends with, "Help me, help you." It sounds modern, even manipulative, but the applause is thunderous. You realize that he's mastered what all successful Bonapartes must, the art of turning exhaustion into devotion. Over the next 3 years, the Republic drifts toward monarchy in everything but name. When the Assembly refuses to amend the Constitution to allow his re-election, Bonaparte decides, famously, that constitutions are negotiable. On December 2nd, 1851, the anniversary of both his uncle's coronation and the victory at Austerlitz, he stages a coup d'etat. Soldiers seize Paris, newspapers are shuttered, opponents arrested. He announces, "I am saving the Republic." You can almost hear Voltaire groan in his grave. But France, weary of instability, barely resists. The plebiscite that follows passes with overwhelming support. "The people have spoken," Bonaparte declares, "and they desire an empire." Within a year, he crowns himself Emperor Napoleon III, draping the tricolor in imperial gold. The revolution that began with cries for liberty ends with polite applause for authority.
Historians still debate what it all meant. Was it progress, regression, or simply the rhythm of France's eternal pendulum? Liberty, order, liberty again. You stroll once more along the Seine, now lined with new boulevards carved by the emperor's planners. Gas lamps glow where barricades once stood. The cafes are busy, the factories louder than ever. France, as always, has moved on, restless, radiant, unresolved. You pause by the bridge at twilight. The water reflects the city's lights like molten gold. Somewhere a band plays La Marseillaise, though slower now, almost wistful. You think of all the names that have come and gone. Louis, Napoleon, Charles, Louis again, and realize that none of them truly owned France. She belongs only to her own idea of herself, forever rewriting her script. You smile, letting the river's sound blur the centuries. Revolutions, monarchies, republics, they're all chapters in the same long dream, a dream that never quite wakes. And you, listener, have walked through that dream tonight, hand in hand with ghosts who never learned how to rest. Now the fires are out and Paris sleeps beneath her own soft haze. The river hums quietly, rolling past bridges that have seen kings rise, emperors fall, and poets age. You can almost feel the cobblestones cooling, the last echo of cannon fire dissolving into lullaby. Breathe with the city for a moment. The air smells of rain and iron, familiar, forgiving. Somewhere, a cafe lamp flickers out. Somewhere else, a printing press clicks one final line before dawn. Even history needs to rest between paragraphs. You imagine Napoleon's ghost standing on a balcony, watching the lights fade, perhaps smiling at the thought that France is still arguing about him. Down another street, Louis-Philippe folds his umbrella in exile and wonders if moderation ever really stood a chance. And in the quiet between them walks the Republic itself, barefoot, curious, eternally young, looking for the next sunrise. If you close your eyes, you can hear it. The whisper of paper turning, the rustle of tricolors in the night wind, the faint murmur of a nation still learning how to say liberty without shouting it. It's the sound of France dreaming itself forward, one revolution at a time. So let the story settle in your chest, warm and weightless. Tomorrow will bring another century, another argument, another anthem. But for now, it's enough to know that the lights of Paris still glow, stubborn and serene. Sleep well, traveler. The city of revolutions will keep the watch.